like I said, you'll be the omniscient voice of God interviewing me
Okay, that's fine. Yeah,
from, from
I
on
can live with
high.
that.
So
That's
December
cool. I like
25th,
being a whistleblower
2020,
voice.
Ethan Pinch interviewing me about my novel and a couple of plays. So take it away,
Yeah,
Ethan.
yeah. This is Ethan Pinch, and today on Christmas, I'm talking with Dan Schneider, artist, author, poet, playwright, erstwhile critic, I suppose, founder of the non-commercial arts website Cosmoetica, for which he regularly interviews a variety of different artists, performers, scientists, scholars, etc. You could easily call him the hardest working writer alive. Certainly, many others suffer in comparison, and this year's no exception. In this video, I am going to be talking to Dan about his most recent novel, Levels, a love story, although I'm hoping also to touch on some of Dan's other work this year, including his playwriting. But Dan, great to talk to you. I know that you wanted to talk about Levels while it was still kind of at the forefront of your mind, whilst the thoughts that were still fresh. So, in mind of that urgency, is there anything kind of what are your kind of thoughts on this novel, kind of straight off, like as it stands in the rest of your work? Like, is this an important novel? Is this well, how does it rate in your overall work, do you think?
Well, thanks for interviewing me because I asked you to after we interviewed about a year and a half ago.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, Levels was probably my favorite book to write next to A Norwegian in the Family.
Hmm.
It's let's see, Norwegian in the Family is the longest. The second longest is the Vincetti Brothers. The third is my sci-fi novel, The Edge of the Show. And so this is my fourth longest individual work. Although if you took my true life memoir and took the four books as one, that would be my number two, and this would be number five. But this is basically a book that was a second science fiction book, but if you've read it through the end, anyone who reads it through the end, we don't. It sort of ends up that it may or may not be science fiction. The idea came to me a few years ago, probably 3 or 4 years ago in 2016. But sometimes these things take time to ripen. Just like the Vincetti Brothers, I had in mind of writing about the real life family for about 20 years before I found the right vehicle for it. And it's basically not only about science fiction and have a love story element to it, but there are four major television shows that influence it. In the same way that A Norwegian in the Family is very much influenced by film, this book is very much influenced by television shows. And the four shows are basically three of the four from the 1960s, one from the 1990s. They're all about alienation and characters on the run. There's The Fugitive, which was a show in the 1960s about a man on the run who was trying to track down a one-armed man who murdered his wife. There's The Prisoner, the Patrick McGoohan vehicle that I've raved about for many years. I think probably the greatest television show of all time, only 17 episodes aired. And then there was a show that actually was filmed a couple of years before The Prisoner, called, oh God, oh my, now I forgot, the, oh God, well, there was Nowhere Man, and then there was, oh my God, this is what happens to me.
Yeah, the Patrick McGowan one, is it? Or
no, it was, and I used. Let's see. The actor, what's his name? Thomas Alden's the main character. He plays Michael Alden. And let me see. This I'm gonna Google. This is what happens when you're very tired. Michael Alden TV show. Coronet Blue. That's it came to me. Coronet Blue, which was a show in which a seeming Russian spy or some kind of spy is attacked in the opening minutes of the show, thrown overboard from a ship, and he surfaces in New York, doesn't know who he is. The only words that he knows are the words Coronet Blue. And that only ran for 13 episodes. Nowhere Man ran for 25 episodes in the mid-90s. And so I had this idea of having a character in search of something. And so the 13 sections of the book are titled after each of the 13 episodes of Coronet Blue. And the individual chapter titles are all from The Fugitive, The Prisoner, and Nowhere Man. and I play with a lot of those tropes. And
Yeah.
the book actually opens. The character is basically the first words of the book are, "Where is my wife?" And the character is seemingly screaming or protesting
Yeah.
loudly because the character. The book opens with him basically waking up in a post-apocalyptic kind of scenario from the 1950s or 60s. There could be zombies, there could be apes running around. It could, there's a lot of possibilities there. And then slowly he meets a few other people on the surface, 14 other people, and then they go sort of down below the surface of this seeming apocalyptic world, sort of like in the movie Forbidden Planet. And each of the characters seemingly goes off on their own adventures, but we follow the adventures of the main character through each of the levels, presumably going further and further down into the planet until he starts going back up again. But again, that's the setup. What it really is, by the time you get to the end of the book, is arguable.
Yes, it's certainly a very strange book. I mean, when I heard that you were writing another science fiction novel, I just kind of assumed, I suppose, that it would be something a bit like more or less Edge of the Shon. It really is quite different, although in the book itself, you do seem to be there seems to be the sense that you're almost kind of returning to themes or to certain ideas that you touched on in Edge of the Shon that you kind of wanted to push forward a bit more. Like, for instance, this idea of like the superhero or the man who attains godlike powers and then sets about using them.
Well, that's the main congress with that, is that both characters, towards the ends of the book, seemingly get godlike powers. In this book, the character loses his powers, or maybe he never really has them. It all depends. But the basic setup is, it's called a love story, and throughout the book, there's the return where as he goes through each levels, he encounters these female holograms that are the guides, and that's actually from a TV show in the early 70s called The Star Lost, which starred Keir Dullea from 2001. It was called The Star Lost, and it was this big ark ship after the Earth has been destroyed. This giant ship had these biodomes, like 50 or 100 of them, and the Keir Dullea character and a couple of other characters who were from sort of the Amish dome go to the different domes. Some of them are domes where it's like the Roman Empire. Some of them are domes where it's more futuristic or whatnot. And I thought, and there's this one computer figure, this old man who comes and says, "May I assist you?" He's sort of the computer voice. And I said, well, let me make it female characters, because of the other 14 characters that are seemingly real in this adventure, only one other is male. There's one young black kid and this is where we get to the television or the movie trope, is that I use a lot of the tropes. There's the younger version of the main character, Tom Alden, which is arguably my doppelganger, but he's not as much like me as some other characters.
There's more than a passing resemblance to you.
Yeah, but in my mind, and I describe him, he looks like the main actor from Coronet Blue, an older version, played by the actor who is in Anne of Green Gables, and God, my mind goes. But anyway, and then there are two young girls, a little black toddler and a Japanese toddler, Setsuko, who are the throwaway children. There's a girl with autism who's 20 years old, who's a belly dancer, a sort of just oddball character. Then there are three young girls who he considers his daughters, two that he works with at the store that he works at, one who's a poet that's lives in Ireland, who's on my E-list. And then there are two older women that at one point he had interest in when they were all younger, but they both rejected him for some reason. And then there were like five females in their 30s and 50s that seem to flirt with him, as do seemingly the levels, the level guides, who seemingly are always offering sex or something. So in a sense, it's a male fantasy in some aspects.
But in a way, that in itself is like a big trope from mid-century sort of sci-fi, isn't it? Kind of, the whole like Zardoz, Barbie murders, the last man on Earth, that kind of thing.
Well, yeah, and also characters like Emma Peel from the Avengers, and also from the early Doctor Who. There was always a beautiful female companion, so there was always the sexual temptation there. Uh,
Yeah.
Frank Converse is the name of the actor. A very good actor who never got as big as he should have been. He was the actor who played in Coronet Blue. So.
Also, another big theme from kind of mid-century sci-fi, sort of the sexuality of robots, I suppose. All these sort of hologram women who are like sirens for Tom Holden.
Yeah, and in the beginning, there seemed to be a handful of episodes that we see something that's in common with all of these shows that I mentioned, is that the hero seemingly gets into trouble. He sees a murder. He becomes a suspect. He runs away. But after the first 5 or 6 levels, the book sort of makes fun of that, because someone or something keeps dropping these little cards that have these sort of little
the cards,
the little TV guide summaries of what's to come, and and a lot of what happens seems to happen off screen then, because sometimes we'll see Tom emerging or coming into the next level, and he's talking about something that happened between the last chapter and whatnot. Because it's not really important. Because we know what he's going to go through. We know he's going to, like number 6 in The Prisoner, he's going to lose in some of these episodes. He's going to win in some of these episodes. His hatred for the holograms and for the masters of the holograms, who we never see, the creators or the masters. They're called several different things. It's an assumption on his part. And then we have these little scenes that happen. Each of the characters gets a few scenes. The 5 main females that are seemingly real, not the holograms. There's a singer who I made based on the singer Alison Krauss, a folk singer here in the U.S., but I made her the younger cousin of Alison Krauss. There's there's a teacher that he worked with, that I worked with when I did my novel on Custodian. I had it based on that character. There's 2 soap opera actresses that have been on the soap opera that I watch here in the U.S. And then there's this science TV show host who's this beautiful young woman who's called in the book the Science Gal. And so he has these assorted kind of fantasies, and then there are other odd little things that happen. And he's always he has a few fantasies about them here and there. And then the only other character that seems to recur, appears 2 or 3 times, is this hologram who's a nun, which is based upon a Fugitive episode, and she seemingly is leading a revolt of the holograms against the master, although most of that happens off screen, and he only hears about it in certain episodes.
Yeah. Just first, I want to call attention a bit more to the levels themselves, I suppose. This mega structure in the story, which Tom Holden, he's sort of spirited away, sort of held prisoner, like a Billy Pilgrim and the Tralfamadorians, inside this strange virtual holographic world, which is a little bit like a video game, is a little bit like Choose Your Own Adventure, is a little bit like fiction or theatre, but the idea is to get your way through successive levels, and with each level there's different women, and there's and I was talking the other night with Dan Linden actually about about Tom Holden and his interactions with all these characters level to level, and he said something very interesting, which I actually want to quote. I'll get it up here. He says the character of Tom Holden, he's almost like he's the prism through which all the characters are refracted. Every character is in a way kind of slightly passive. They react, or they reflect kind of something which Tom is doing kind of within the narrative itself, and how the way that the external and the internal narrative are so intrinsically linked in this way that Tom has this way that he manipulates everything.
Well, the actual idea for levels, I said I wanted to do since 2016, but it all stemmed from actually about 40 plus years ago when I was in my late teens. When I was about 13 or 14, I had this sort of sexual fantasy about this girl who lived on my block who wanted to have sex with me when we were young, I didn't do it because she had problems. She had some issues with her weight and her looks and what. I mean, if she had been confident, I would have. But I didn't want to. I knew I could push her over the edge. So in my mind though, I had this idea of like a post-apocalyptic fantasy. And as the years went by, that sort of got ingrained in my mind. I would sometimes have dreams, actual dreams, not just waking fantasies. And the girls would change here and there. And so that was the genesis for the idea that there would be many different women, and the idea that maybe these levels should be all females that come and go. And some of them he's less hostile to, some of them he's more hostile to. Another important point that I want to bring in before I forget, though, is this is the first book where I explicitly decided to use some visual, and I used 5 photographs of my wife Jessica as representations of the visualization of Tom's wife, Helenka.
Yes.
And I did that. I initially thought I might do more, like do some hand drawings, like, because in my mind I was thinking of Kenneth Patchen and some of his books. I don't know if you ever read that. He was a great poet, an okay prose writer, but he was in the 30s and 40s. He was very avant-garde. So I decided to just restrain it to 5 photographs of Jessica. And every so often in the book, they pop up. Just as, for example, when Tom has killed a deer, he has that comes back. And then later he also accidentally runs over, is it an aardvark? No, I forget. But he runs over another animal. And so that adds the element of something has happened. Tom, from the very beginning with "Where is my wife?" There's some kind of trauma that has been inflicted upon him. We don't know what. Is his wife dead? Is his wife lost? Is he having a dream because he's upset of having accidentally roadkilled some animals? Something is off, and that's put him possibly in some other realm.
Yeah, I like there's all sorts of things I really want to get to here. Kind of one, but for instance, this thing about the repetition, the way things kind of loop again and again, but change slightly in the book, like almost glitching, and the use of the pictures as well, kind of the pictures of the character Helenka, and what you do with that too.
And Helenka, by the way, just so, for the record, in a great Woody Allen movie called Another Woman, there's a scene where Jenna Rollins, the main character's lover, played by Gene Hackman, has left her after her bad treatment of him. She has a dream of seeing him, and in the dream he says that he has written a character in his book called Helenka based upon the Jenna Rollins character. So I said Jessica Helenka. That's good. It's a nice little touch there, I thought. But anyway.
The specter of Woody Allen appears again in one of the novels. And I really like how playful you get with. You mentioned Kenneth Patchen, but I was thinking kind of Vonnegut and his use sometimes of illustrations or pictograms. But the kind of how playful you get with kind of the use of the pictures. Like I think there's an instance once where you use a picture of Helenka, like one of those missing photographs on the side of a milk carton for missing children. I think Tom Alden sat at a table and he sees Helenka's picture on a carton, and that's how it appears to us on the text. And all these games you play with the kind of the use of the refrain and repetition, which connects brilliantly again, I think, to like Tristram Shandy, which is a text which gets referenced surprisingly quite a lot in this book, and the sort of the weird games that Thomas Sterne would often play kind of in the text.
Tom seemingly carries a copy of Tristram Shandy, although the book seemingly changes a few times here and there, but it goes back to Shandy.
It's a very curious book. You know, when I read a copy of Tristram Shandy, I got a copy from the library, and I read sort of halfway through, and somebody had actually written in the margin in a bright neon highlighter, "This book is impossible. I don't know how anyone would want to finish this." And I just thought that was delightful. I don't know. But what are your thoughts on Stern and how Tristram Shandy relates to this text?
Well, Tristram Shandy is a book about the identity of Tristram Shandy. Shandy, the character, is dealing with the memories of his family. He's constantly berating his uncle. His again, uh, I looked through. I didn't reread Tristram Shandy, but I took some episodes there, and some of them, you'll go through, and sometimes I'll just sort of flip, and I'll go, oh, that's a good thing. And the interactivity happens when, let's say, if I take a section that's dealing with him berating his uncle or something, and I'll take that and say, I'm going to build around that. And so I instead of looking for a specific section that relates to what I'm writing, I'm going to say, oh, I like that. And just the way gravity is said to be a warping of space-time, I'll say, I'm going to make my book go around that. And so I wasn't planning on, for example, doing maybe Tom meeting some character or having some cynical remark, but by using a three or four paragraph selection there, I say this, Shandy is being real pissy in this section. Now Tom might be pissy, or maybe I'll make him more reflective. And so that's a way to use another work of art that it influences your book, but you're not using it in a subservient manner. You're actually taking the outside work and twisting your work into something different, and it gives you an impetus to go into a direction that maybe you weren't going to go into before.
Well, that's the thing. As a reader, like reading something like Neville's, where you're absorbing all these different sort of texts and influences, it's just fascinating as a reader to see this kind of lineage suddenly happening between, Patrick McGowan's The Prisoner on one hand, and Forbidden Planet, or and then suddenly on the other hand, like something like Tristram Shandy, or other works. It's just really interesting seeing those connections suddenly being made, which once they've been made seem logical, like in a way this kind of
and you just hit upon it. That's what's called negative capability.
Yeah.
John Keats, that when you take two things that you would not have before associated, but you have some form, some art, whatever it might be, that once they are linked together, something goes off and you go, oh, that works. That seems natural. That's that ability. That's what's called negative capability, to bring two seemingly disparate things together. But once they're together, you say, oh, they should have always been together.
Yeah. And we were talking as well about kind of these sort of themes and tropes from sci-fi or sort of mid-century modernism, especially this sort of thing from The Prisoner, or other works that are cited in levels, like Cube, or other things like, where it's almost like architecture as confinement and all this other stuff, and sort of making your way from space to space to space, things being controlled in sort of systematic.
Right. And Cube is a good example, because Cube is not itself in and of itself great art. It's a good low budget, modest sci-fi film from whatever it was, 99, 2000, or whatever it was.
Yeah.
But yeah. It's something that's a good idea. It's sort of like an extended Twilight Zone episode. And yes, the episodic nature, or the picaresque nature, if you want to get fancy, of this book lends itself to those kinds of connections.
Yeah, and I think The Prisoner is probably the most sort of, it's why The Prisoner kind of recurs again and again in your own work. I think the fact that it's really emblematic in this sense of kind of this thing where it's almost like everything is turned in on kind of the character itself, and actually let's get down to it then again, this thing about Neville's, right? When I heard that kind of this book was going to be called Neville's, I was kind of startled a bit, because Neville's is kind of like an inside joke between me and Mark and some friends. Kind of like, we say if something's good, we say, oh, check this out, this is really good, it's Neville's, right? This is really good, it's Neville's. The idea about, we say something's good, it's got levels, it's got depth, and we experience kind of meaning as a depth, right? Something that's, if something's really good, you can just go into it again and again and again, on and on and on. But this is this also idea of I suppose dimensions too. I mean, this book's called like Neville's A Love Story. That's a title that almost puts me in mind of Flatland, A Romance of Dimensions by Edwin Abbott.
And that's a great book too. That there is a sense, like I said, because remember, a sphere comes along and eventually knocks a square up and out of his comfortable place. Well, Tom Alden is knocked out of his comfortable place very early in that book.
Yes. But to talk, and in that sense, kind of the sense of levels again makes me think of something cumulative, level on level on level, something building on some, and the experiences of Tom, in a way, character to character to character, in these holograms and these women, and the looping, the repeating of dreams. There is the thing where we have kind of the repetition, or the thing that repeats or redoubles itself, but it's changed in the redoubling or in the multiplication.
Well, yeah, a good example is he has a number of, like I said, fantasies with some of the main five females. There's the one soap actress who's said to be not as good as an actress as the other one, but who seems to be more troubled, and therefore she's more drawn to Tom. He has a number of fantasies with her. He has some fantasies, but probably maybe the most blatant one is with the school teacher that has a fantasy. But this is where I borrow from TV. He has a sexual fantasy about the young school teacher who happens to be a black female, and yet then what happens, just like in a lot of TV shows, that ends and we start back at the beginning of what would be the fantasy, and we see it was a fantasy. She's just coming in and saying goodnight or whatever it might be.
Yeah. I was also going to say the sense of well, Tom Alden is kind of, it could be seen as the dreamer too, or like the whole thing could be seen as the dream of the author or the audience. But I was also going to say that the thing about this book that's also quite striking is how dramatic it is, in a sense, like how there's actually there's people ruminating and thinking and remembering and dreaming. And there's an interesting thing that happens with the switching between the first person and the third person as well, I think, especially with those refrains of the anecdote about Tom Alden running over the baby deer.
Right. Well, the two roadkill ones, the repetitions of those are first person from Tom's voice. The book, you're right, is in the third person, which suggests that there is another element there.
There's so much I want to talk about here, like, but the love story element of it, like, I think what struck me right away after kind of finishing the whole novel was kind of how tender a kind of a novel it was, kind of like how kind of sort of driven again by this kind of sincere feeling of kind of affection for Helenka, Tom Alden's wife. Like it stands out to me kind of on that kind of, I suppose, that sentimental level as being quite a sort of sincere kind of heartfelt novel. I mean, like,
well, you need a grounding.
Yeah.
You need a grounding, and initially I didn't. It was maybe about 20% into the book that I decided to call it a love story, because I wanted to do something that wasn't a Hollywood love story, because this uses a lot of TV and Hollywood kind of tropes. But in the end, this is about a mature love, because Tom is said to be in his 50s. Helenka, I think, is probably said to be in her 40s or whatnot. And so these are people that have been together 20 years, and it's obviously based upon Jessica and me. And it's not the love story where they end up together kissing and smooching and whatnot, where they're running in slow motion like a 1960s kind of thing. But it's about a man who has been disoriented. Something has happened, gone wrong. Whether she's actually missing or not, we don't know. But that's one of the reasons the picture.
Like, it almost sounds like it's quite a chivalric kind of romantic kind of love story in a way. It's that it's almost kind of a pretty obvious comparison to make, but it puts one in mind of, Dante and Beatrice, kind of the searching for the vanished ideal love.
Yeah, but Helenka isn't idealized. I think Tom a few times says, sometimes she drives him crazy or whatnot. But he does. He clearly, and the visual representations, the 5 photos that I took of Jessica to use as Helenka, are. I wanted to show the power of the image because there are two of her straight on. One of them is she looks sort of like a little devil. Another one she's sideways wearing cornrows, and another one she's kind of looking pouty and angry. And I chose and each of them is symbolic because when the rumination that Tom is having simply by does Helenka look pissed off? Does Helenka look sideways and she's looking up as if she's glorious or whatnot? And these are the kinds of memories, because when people have memories of stuff, it's usually a repetition of the same thing, maybe slightly altered, but over and over again. And so his memories of his wife leave him in a certain mood, and so he has these certain images of her.
Yeah, but she's an absence though. She's like a present absence in the novel. Like, and she only appears like Beatrice at the end, and as this kind of. I mentioned something about the dramatic, and I want to get back to that too. The fact that in reading this, I can see a kind of a noticeable it feels kind of quite similar in a way to your writing from your playwriting, and that very dialogue heavy, very kind of immediate, dramatic sort of thing. That there's not a whole lot of a tumbling, really kind of abstract prose in this novel. If you take what I mean.
Yeah, well, it's not like The Edge of the Shown, which was a more classic space opera. With Edge of the Shown, I basically took everything in the kitchen sink from science fiction, and I even rewrote part of Philip K. Dick short story that was trite.
Yeah.
And I'm doing that's sort of, in a sense, the science fiction version of A Norwegian in the Family. This book, on the other hand, was always going to be more, in my mind, repetitious. It was always going to be more about what is left out, including Helenka, is often as important as what is repeated. And things that are implied there. The very fact, and there are little tweaks here and there. The fact that you have an autistic girl that's there who's called Sister. Well, there was Sister. What was she has the same name as
the nun.
The nun, the holographic nun. And so there's a connection there. And you have the little smart ass kid who, in my mind, I took from the end of the 1968 Planet of the Apes. There's the young ape that says to Charlton Heston, the older generation, they're always doing us. And Heston says, never trust anyone over 30. And at one point, the little kid, Bruno Bryant, I call him, says to Tom, basically, he's the one who coins the women there, Tom's pussy posse,
Yeah. What I guess what I was trying to get at that, I was talking to Dan Linden, he said something very interesting again. He said he wasn't even sure if we could call this a novel, he said it should be called theater of the mind or something like that. There were these I remember some chapters ending with you say something along the lines of a hand reaches out and presses a button and the camera stops recording. We get all these very just odd kind of weirdly sort of disjunctive things happening within the text that sort of have us looking through windows, or most of the time we're looking through Tom's eyes, but very often we're sort of pulled back, or some sort of other weird thing is pulled.
Yeah, but there is progression too. And for example, I wanted to say too, I told you how I used a lot of the chapter titles from the different shows, and also the section, because it's grouped into 13 sections of 3 chapters each, or 39 chapters. And so that's a way too for me to have like a loom, and I can thread the stories in and out around the loom in a way. Because, for example, when I have a title like there's one title called the 2130, and so that has a different meaning than it was in the show. And then there's another like the last chapter title is called what is it called here? The Last Second of a Big Dream, which comes from the Fugitive, and
Yeah.
that I said, oh well, that has to be the ending chapter. Although it should be said too, just like with the Norwegian and the Family, although not as grandly, this book has an opening. It opens with "Where is my wife," which is chapter 0, which isn't actually in the contents, and then it ends with non-contents page stuff too. A repetition of chapter 0, then chapter infinity, and then we get the appearance of Helenka.
Also what I want to kind of talk about in line with these other kind of sort of quirks that are sort of on my mind at the moment, the appearance towards the end of the all, and the way that the speech of the all is registered as these what punctuation mark is it? These sort of these typographic just white noise. Yeah, and this put me in mind of, on the one hand, Tristram Shandy and kind of the sort of things that Sterndis there. On the other hand, it also puts me in mind of your other work, your work in theatre with the Khan trilogy, with the Genghis Khan, and the interactions between the various Kargans and the sort of symbolic character of the crow, and the sort of the garbled ultra rhetorical speech going on. It's so can you talk a bit about that, kind of like how that occurred to you, the sort of the conversation between the all and Tom Alden? Because in Edge of the Shon you had Elias Walker talking to the Shon, and it wasn't anywhere near as strange in a way.
Yeah. Well, in the Edge of the Shon, there's the character called the Dogfish, which is this supersized, basically, it's sort of like the white whale of that book. But it's also sort of, there's also a Grendel and Grendel's mother kind of thing with that, because there's a creature that the captain Elias Walker, when he's supercharged, ends up battling, and it's a symbolic battle. So I thought to myself, I don't want to end it with it being Tom's dream, although Tom does seemingly wake up, but then in his waking state he gains these powers. Then it turns out he loses them, and how he loses them, supposedly, is there's this creature called the All, and I got that idea from comic books. I borrowed that. I forget whether it's the DC or the Marvel universe, which are the two major comic book companies in the U.S. There's a character known as the One Above All, which is the equivalent of Jehovah, Yahweh, the Christian God, and then there's the One Below All. So I said, let me just do the All. And here's where synchronicity happens. So the All was going to be this character that, like in India, dreams. And the All apparently comes from the future or is outside of time, and discovered Tom Alden's writing and was moved by Tom Alden and decided to visit Tom Alden. And in doing so, however, when the All dreams, it changes reality, at least for while it's dreaming. So so it could be that the whole of the book has been dreamt of by the All. But then I said, my mind, I said, well, what's interesting is Tom Alden, T.A., the All, T.A. So is that, again, another aspect of Tom Alden? But then we also know that there is a voice outside of that. And if you recall, the character that is speaking in the third person, turns out that there is, you may have missed it, but I don't know. There is a hologram that apparently in one of the levels is crossing the street and sees Tom Alden.
Yes, no, I actually have this open right here. Like, if you permit me to read a bit of it.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead if you want.
It's so jumped out at me that I had to kind of actually screenshot it, because it sort of strikes me as it's so interesting. I was saying that there's not too much sort of internal sort of stuff, but then again, like, I contradict myself by producing this story, which is actually kind of classic sort of Schneiderian sort of interior monologue stuff. And if I just get it up here, Midway through the crosswalk, at the point closest to each other, the download happened, and as Tom walked on, without even the least recognition of me, I stopped and eyed his back as other clueless holograms like me went about their existences, as cluelessly as I had been mere seconds before. We had walked not together, but at cross purposes in a crosswalk, and as I paused, as Tom shrunk in my cocked view of him, I wondered what any single step one takes at any point in one's existence means, what it really means, or even can mean.
Yeah, well,
So
so that was me. Uh, so there's that element, and then we actually get towards the end. Helenka seems to wake up. So has Helenka been the dreamer? Is Helenka in charge? Is Tom in charge? Is one of the holograms? Is it the all? We don't know.
yeah,
And in a sense, it doesn't really matter because they may it may not be that the levels are consistently going
it's like
down.
that thing about people hectoring Patrick McGowan, kind of like, well, what the fuck was that all about with the ending? Like,
Yeah,
whose dream really is it?
and and it is.
It really shouldn't be an answer. That would just it's
Right.
not.
But it's also very similar to the Hindu idea of circular time because we end up back at chapter 0, then chapter infinity, and in the end, Helenka's waking up. And so it begins and it ends with "Where's my wife?" and then we seemingly get an answer, or is it an answer?
Yeah, it's especially kind of interesting as well how kind of we get the whole 3, 2, 1 countdown right before the ending of the book.
Well, that was me because at the end I said, "God damn it, I'm drifting towards a prisoner type ending." So that my little nod or my little because remember in the last episode of The Prisoner we see what seems to be nuclear weapons going off. So I wanted the 3, 2, 1 countdown as if something dramatic is going to happen. But all that happens is Helenka turns around, she's typing on her computer and says, "Hi honey, I'm home." Basically, as she actually says here. Let's see. As I scroll down, "Where's my wife? Where's my wife?" The exact same thing at 0 and infinity, and then we get the 5 pictures of Helenka. "Where my wife is?" Question mark. She looked up from her PC and stopped typing, smiled, and said to her husband, "Here." And here's the important thing.
Yeah.
The book opens, the very first words of the text, even though they're outside the seeming diegesis, are, "Where is my wife?" Where? Helenka says, "Here." Where and here. So that in itself is an answer. Where are you? I'm here. It's just like Big Frank at the end of a Norwegian in the Family breaks out at the end and he says something like, "Hey, Danny boy, is this really the end?"
Yeah. I've in my notes for kind of like our talk, like at the top of the page, I've got fuck, I feel down. This novel, so it goes.
Well, yeah, and it's a poo to weep moment to go back to Monaghan.
Yeah, poo to weep. I suppose also very much in that essential thing in that it repeats and it sort of takes on this changing significance within the text. So I mean, I mentioned that that certain things like, say, for instance, the dialogue between the All and Tom Alden put me in mind of certain things from your playwriting, and it's got me wondering now, because it seems like from what you're saying, the idea or the kind of the beginnings of the ideas for this novel have been kind of with you for a while now. Do you feel like you've been like testing certain things out in your playwriting, kind of that you might be bringing to the novels? I mean, obviously you expect some things to cross over kind of project to project to project, but do you feel kind of like that you're kind of often testing out things within theatre to see kind of how they might then work in prose, or vice versa?
Well, everything influences everything else. I mean, I'm influenced by Jessica's work. I'm influenced by what I've seen, these TV shows. I'm influenced by real people that I knew. I'm influenced by watching my soap opera. I'm influenced. And so, certainly the moi that started with the Khan plays, I did then use in a later play. I dropped the moi. I just wanted to keep them within the Khans. And I think I have it in the Arthurian plays, if you've read them. In the King Arthur plays, I use the little tilde, I think it is called. And so I said, well, let me just use that, because and
you also have the dialogue between, I believe, Gawain, is it, and the sort of the beast
Yeah,
character,
yeah, and
which
yeah,
is
right, and since the all is in my mind at least connected to the one above all or Yahweh. Well,
yeah,
Jews and Christians and Muslims believe that contacting Yahweh or Allah, that it's ineffable. So we can't know. I mean, Tom, in his communication, if this is some godlike creature, their communication, Tom can only hear it on. We can only hear his end of it because, what can I really say? Oh yeah, I like to dream shit and fuck up people's lives. What is the all going to say? So we have to leave that kind of blank.
yeah. Like there are you have that a lot. The open endedness, I think, it is a big part of. Well, I mean, we were talking about the prisoner and sort of the whole kind of moment of unmasking number one. Who is number one? It's it's you, it's the audience, it's number six. It can be essentially kind of a mirror.
But
And
Tom is all men in a sense. The all Tom T.A. He's an everyman in some senses. I mean, yes, he's maybe smarter than other men, but he has the same flaws. I mean, he's a flawed character. He's not godlike. I mean, clearly, for example, he has some petty grudges against the two older women, one who rejected him, and now he takes glee in the fact that she's fat, and that most people would laugh that this fat woman would reject him. Another one had some dust up with Helenka, and so he sort of marginalizes her. And again, I mean, not that he actually acts upon some of the feelings stirred up by some of the other females in this adventure, whatever it is. But I mean, he's clearly someone who's conflicted about, if Helenka is dead, does he have to wait a certain amount of time before he has feelings and whatnot? So he's certainly a flawed character. And I think that makes him more interesting, certainly, and relatable.
yeah, well, there's this whole kind of a Freudian thing to it, I guess, like as well, because I mean, it is like this whole kind of pervy plot of this guy with like you're saying, the Pussy Patrol or the Pussy Posse, and like level by level, it's almost like this Freudian idea of the architecture of the mind. He's going into himself or into a mind, and like, and that these women may be all kind of either projections of him or either literally or.
But also their projections of the TV shows. For example, with the with the science gal, the main fantasy he has of the science. I talked about when he had the sexual fantasy with the school teacher.
Yeah.
So he has another fantasy, and his one night one morning when I was just Googling around, I came upon an old episode of the Dean Martin television show, which was a variety show from the 1960s. Dean Martin was a big star back in the 50s and 60s. And anyway, he hosted this show, and what he would do is there was a two-story set, and he would start singing a song, and then he'd slide down a fireman's pole, and there often would be it might be a billiards table, and there'd be maybe some gorgeous woman who would start singing. So his fantasy opens up. He's on the set of the Dean Martin show from 50 years ago. He slides down the television pole or whatnot, and there is the science gal, who's this beautiful gal who reminds him of Valerie Bertinelli, who's a TV star that was big in my youth, and I've used her in a few iterations in my work. And he's drawn to her. She's there in a slinky gown. She's gorgeous, and they ask, well, should we be singing? And what happens is they exit the set, and they end up in a very Twilight Zone episode. There's a Twilight Zone episode sort of called Five Characters in Search of an Exit, in which these five characters are in this thing, and they don't this round container or spaceship. They're looking up, and there's a light up above them. Well, it turns out it's Christmas time. This is a Salvation Army waste can where dolls have been dropped in at the bottom, and when they try to escape, they find out that they aren't real. And so but Tom is aware of this. He knows that story, and so when he's lifting the science gal over his head, he says, "Don't go over," because he fears she's fall out and he won't find her again. Well, that doesn't happen, but he's also in order to do so, since she's wearing a gown, she has to get down to her underwear, and I think it's in that scene, or maybe it's another scene where he says, "Look, you wouldn't want to have sex with me or whatnot because you're too young," and she assures him that he's too old for her. So he's sort of like, thank God, because he this gorgeous young woman in her underwear he's lifting up to possibly her doom, and so it's an interesting way to play with that Twilight Zone episode and bring it in a different way that deals with the sexual neuroses of this middle-aged man rather than just dolls in a Salvation Army container.
No, but I'm actually quite interested in kind of like how like sexual relationships are kind of a forefront of this novel, like in a really kind of big way. And like,
well, it's a love story, but
it's a love story, but it seems like, I mean, it's a love story to the Helenka of the story, but it also seems like a love story to women, as a whole, kind of like your admiration, your feelings of sort of
well, I don't know necessarily. I mean, like I said, Tom has, he takes. I mean, he's human, so like I said, he takes a certain glee in sort of the woman who's gotten fat and that she had once rejected him. He takes a sort of glee in the other female character who was not nice to his wife, and he's sort of kind of dismissive in that the whole book gets more and more focused on him. He as we go on, everything starts dropping away.
It's all about him. I mean, I wouldn't argue that kind of. I mean, everything is basically, the women included, like, it's for Tom's regard, and like, and he's very much the catalyst of everything. Don't you think?
Yeah, and Tom, and just I didn't mention it, but Tom Alden. The last name comes from the Coronet Blue character, and then in Nowhere Man there was a character, Tom Vale was the main character. So I said, let me just stick them together, because I didn't want to use McGowan, and I didn't want to use the prisoner characters, the fugitive characters, because they're too well known. So I said, let me make Tom Alden. That's a nice generic Anglo sounding name.
Yeah, it's in a way it's one of the kind of the furthest removed of all the kind of like this could be seen as a fictional analog of yourself, or so, like, but it doesn't even, like, the name doesn't bear a resemblance to yours, really.
Yeah.
Like Tom Alden.
Yeah, I mean most of them are like Danny Wagner or Manny Kolb, or closer, but
Manny, Danny.
Yeah.
But like do you have any ideas for like new projects in the works? I mean, do you have where are you going to go on from this, Dan?
Well, I did the 2 plays since, one on Tamerlane, the historical conqueror, and then I reworked the Beowulf myth. Right now, the play I'm working on now, I started about a week ago, is a play on Joe Hill, the Union activist who was killed in 1915, accused of murder. So I wanted to do a historical character that's not as well known and isn't a conqueror of a country. So I wanted to bring that down. And then I've got some other. I mean, I've always got ideas. I mean, as far as the next book, I have an idea of a final Maravelli family book, because at the end of my spy novel, the guy who takes over the Maravelli family is Gino Vincetti's pal, Joey Greco, from the Vincetti brothers, although he's grown up. And I sort of want to have Joey Greco run the Maravelli family into ruin, sort of like, I guess, Tony Soprano did.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so I mean, but that might be 2 or 3 years off. It all depends. This Levels, as I said, was about 4 years since I first had the idea of writing a book, and I had to wait on it. I did a book called The Scorpion Swam that I wanted to use the British scientist Michael Faraday, who I've always been a big fan of. And what happened was I wanted to do a Faraday novel, but his life was too boring. So I decided to merge Michael Faraday in with Henry Matsumi, my alter ego in that book. And then he just ended up sort of being a Jiminy Cricket. Michael Faraday ended up being sort of a Jiminy Cricket in that book. And that's all that's left of my idea of the Michael Faraday book, because Michael Faraday, although he's a great scientist, led a fucking boring life other than his scientific discoveries. So
a scorpion. What really intrigues me, and I know a lot of other readers of your work, Dan, is kind of in a sense this sustained continuity, this fictive continuity that kind of runs through a lot of your works. I mean, with my last question, what I wanted to get the sense of was like was Levels going to be like a sort of a hinge or something, like where you're gonna like, was it the end of something and the start of something else, like, because in a way there's so many projects that like have kind of the sort of the weight and purpose that they feel like they could be final statements to something, but yet we just keep going on, we keep getting kind of this ballooning out of this like building out of different worlds and coupling together of different narratives, but which is curious, bearing in mind like the historical work you've done too, like in your plays, like with the Alexander play and the Khan plays and the Beowulf play and the Arthur plays, all these sort of historical figures. Like, but like I was saying with like a friend of mine the other day that like it's almost as if you're trying to like absorb all of history, like every single historical sort of story.
Well, I'll tell you with the plays in my in the play that I just finished, the last one that I finished, which was on Beowulf, there's a character called Chloe Chronicles, and that's based upon a real life actress named Chloe Chronicles. And Chloe Chronicles is on the American soap opera General Hospital, which was the basis for Upstate Hospital, where the two Rebecca characters. There's Rebecca Forbes, who is based upon the real life actress named Rebecca Herbst, who's this gorgeous brunette who's, you know, I just liked her for 20 years. She's a very good actress. She's a good actress, but she's not a great actress. And then the Rebecca, the more flirtatious character, who's called Rebecca Selig, is based upon an actress named Rebecca Budig. And Rebecca Budig is the better actress, but she's not, in my mind, not quite as beautiful as the other one. But she's always played bad girl characters. And so I said, let me take this. But this Chloe Chronicles, the real life actress Chloe Chronicles, is in her mid-20s. She is a great actress. She reminds me of Megan Fowler. She reminds me of Jenna Rollins. She is a great actress. I tried a couple of times to see if I could interview her. She just left the soap opera. So I said, let me introduce, because I have, for example, I have a character, Megan Morrow, who's appeared in a handful of plays, who's based upon Megan Fowler's. She was in my first play, which was based upon her and a Valerie Bertinelli character stand-in. And I said, let me take this Chloe character, and I can do some meta stuff with her. So, because in this first play, Jessica Wagner, Megan Morrow, and Chloe Chronicles appear. And I said, I want to eventually start a series of plays called the Chloe Chronicles, about a woman in her 20s who's an actress who's going to go through assorted things. But I wanted to introduce her metafictically, because in, for example, this Joe Hill novel, Chloe and Megan appear again, and so I want to introduce her into sort of the Danny Wagner verse, and that was the way to do it. But as far as like books, other than maybe the Maravelli wrap up book, I do have an idea for a World War II novel, which would, but again, that's years off, because in my mind there's a character in the Vincetti brothers in the Big Frank scenes of World War II, where Big Frank kills one of his COs, his commanding officers, and I said, maybe I don't want to do the officer that's killed by Big Frank, but maybe he has a brother, and so I focus on the brother, and then he hears about his brother being killed or whatnot, and that would be my take on World War II, separate and apart. But again, there's a lot of ideas that again will just come, because it could be in 3 months I'll come upon something, and I'll write 3 or 4 plays right in a row that I have no idea that I'm going to write right now.
Yeah. I was thinking, do you still get trouble like putting real life characters into the plays and stuff? I know in the past you've had difficulties sort of with that sometimes.
With the plays.
Not with the play, but like with your novels, I know you've got some trouble with that.
Oh well, yeah. I mean, with the novels, you have to. I mean, with anything, you have to disguise it to a degree. But you know, for example, I guess in the Vincetti brothers, I mean, it's less the people as though taking those some other works. You know, I use, for example, some song lyrics in the Vincetti brothers. But I mean, with characters like the Megan Morrow being based on Megan Fowler, I mean, number one, it's a good character, and it's clearly it's acknowledged that it's based upon, and it's not that character. So it's like if I did a character based upon Travis Bickle,
Well, surely you would argue that all your characters are good characters. So so the argument is if we're in one of your books, we should just be flattered.
oh, you're talking about people that I've used personally. Yeah, well, someone told me you thought you were going to end up in the book. I mean, I because
No, I would dread that. But I'm saying is it still a difficult or like tiresome thing to incorporate those things from real life or those people from real life
well,
into
it's like with Woody. It's like in a lot of Woody Allen films. I mean, is the Woody character really Woody? You know, he has different names and whatnot. And yeah, there's going to be obviously based 40 or 50% in one book, film, 30% in another, 60 in another. I mean, the various iterations of me are like that. Helenka, what little we get of her is certainly like Jessica to some degree, as described by Tom. But still,
But in a way, kind of it might seem like a trivial thing on the surface, but in posterity, when people in the future read your works, that is going to be a big thing on their mind. That kind of who is Dan Schneider? I mean, and you are kind of a big presence in the works. You're looking over the reader's shoulder a lot of the time. So that is going to be kind of something that people are going to want to have to wish they could travel back into the past to fucking ask you. And even though it's
well, that's why I do these videos too.
Isn't it?
That's why I do these videos too. But that's something that has waxed and waned. If you look at, for example, the Vincetti brothers or Tumbleweeds, which were the first two books of the New York Quartet, there isn't that much of an overlap. Yes, Manny Cole is certainly has certain aspects of his life that mirror mine, but Danny Wagner is clearly the character that's the most like me. Tom Alden is peripherally like me in that he's middle-aged and he's a writer, and seemingly this Hindu-like, godlike creature comes to his time and his place, and may or may not be the agent behind all of this. But again, that it's Tom. This could all just be Tom's ego and his fantasy about being a great writer. And that's something I've been accused of by people who are trolls online or whatnot. So you got to play with it. You have to have fun with it. So what would happen if a Dan Schneider-like character was stuck in an apocalyptic or post-apocalyptic world with a lot of beautiful women, and not only that, but holograms who are ready to please him and are constantly tempting him and whatnot. And yet he doesn't know if his wife is dead, so he can't act upon it. So I mean, you got this ultimate kind of, in a sense, he's got this forced impotence upon him. So he has these, and that might be the thing that generates all of these different levels here of where he's going up and down. And the levels, for example, go from level 0 to level infinity, but we only see a number of levels, so we don't know how long this goes on. This could be something that, like Groundhog Day, stretches out for thousands of years or something. Or he could, even if he goes with hundreds or thousands or trillions of levels in between, what is infinity?
It's just like in that sense of the Slaughterhouse-Five, that subjectivity of time and consequently space.
Yeah.
We don't know how long Tom's been in any given level.
Well, Billy Pilgrim becomes unstuck in time. Tom is unstuck possibly in time, but maybe in his mind or someone else's or something else's mind. So Tom has become unstuck in mind in some way.
Yeah. But in a way, he's individualized. He's lots of different things at the same time, and in a way that, like you're saying, there's no one definitive meaning or explanation that will sum up or tie up or roll up all these things you're doing in the narrative or anything else, because everything is uniaxial. There's lots of different things, different ways into the story, ways through it. But in a way, how you turn this into just structures and structures or levels on levels. I mean, just in the sense that it's this space, this prison that Tom has to get through, just like we have to get through the book in a way. We have to find our way through, and we have to kind of be impressed and be enjoying what's happening at the moment. But we need it to change moment to moment in order for us to sustain that enjoyment or engagement.
Well,
so it's that kind of that pressure, that stress,
when we
kind of thing that's what's there with TV, I think, which is so emblematic. That thing with like what keeps you watching, you know, the cliffhanger at the end of every episode and all that sort of the melodramatic element. If you take my meaning.
When we spoke the last time about some stuff, and you spoke about a Norwegian in the family, I told you how in the bits trip through literature, you had said something like that you were glad you didn't know how long it was going to be when it started out. And in a similar way, the repetitions of the death of the deer is similar in that it like Bit, it happens over again, but it gets bigger and smaller and bigger and smaller and changes around. And in a sense, if you don't have to read it all if you don't want to, but if you do, you'll get a little bit more. But you could sort of pick them out and say, oh, here we got the deer. Okay, I got the idea about the repetition about the deer dying or whatnot. Let's maybe go to the next little fragment or whatnot. And so you can pick them out and you can pick and choose. And it's a way to foster more interactivity with the reader, which I always think is a good thing.
Yeah. Like, you were mentioning sort of like projects in the future. Is it the case that sort of like sometimes a project, or like, sorry to put it like as project, but when an idea for a thing that could be a novel or a play, does it sometimes come about as a reaction to a project ending? Or is it just the case that these ideas all run tangentially at the same time, like kind of on the go, you've just got these different things going, and kind of at any one point you'll go, I'll work on this now, and you'll grab this thread. Okay, I'll work on this now, and you do this other thread.
I mean, the thing I try to do is just have things going around it in my mind. Something will happen maybe 2 weeks from now that I'll write a note down, and 2 years from now I'll pick that up, or I'll get something will happen, like I mentioned, to ending the Maravelli family. Maybe I'll see some YouTube video on a gangster, or maybe something will happen at work, and I'll say, oh, that's the in for me to get to the Joey Greco character. Now I can write the book. When I did a Norwegian in the family, you remember it opens up with the flowery speech of the Norwegian about hyacinths in May and whatnot. And I said, and I knew once I got that, I said, I've got the whole book. So almost 2.5 million words came just from my stumbling. Somehow it ruminated my mind. I said, hyacinths in May, always, whatever the fuck he says, And I said, that's the key to the Norwegian character, and that's the key that'll open up the book. And it's like the old saying about going through a house. To go through a house, at some point, every work you start and every choice you make starts opening up ideas. And then at some point, you get to a point where you're reaching the turning point, the point where now you got to go down. And so every choice you make now starts closing doors. And so the way you open up and the way you maneuver through a home, or you maneuver through the levels, is going to affect what you do later on. And sometimes you can go back and say, oh, this door opened up this idea. Let me just throw in a little bon mot back 27 chapters earlier. So something that happens, an idea that comes to you midway through the book, that you put in the book 3/4 of the way in, makes you go back and rewrite an earlier part of the book, so that you've planted a seed that some smart reader is going to get later on that wasn't there when you wrote the first draft or the second or the 10th draft of that. And so that you always have to be open. Too many people, I think I once said this to Alex Sheremit, or maybe it was Peter Cleese, that a woman that I once knew and had an aborted encounter with, very much like some of the Levels women. I saw a video she did online, and she's got this typical thing where she, on her wall, her bedroom wall, she's got this whole timeline, and she's got these posters, and she's got everything plotted out and whatnot. And the idea of the book was just not good. It was generic and silly and whatnot. But But even if it
Well,
had,
there's that thing is like pre-calculating something before you've
right,
actually done it.
right,
When the work should come from the work,
and
isn't it?
and the work should be a constant generative dynamo that's going,
Yeah.
and you have to, as an artist, if 9 months into a million word book that you're writing that's is going to take 3 years, you get something that means you have to go back and rewrite the first 20%. Do it.
Yeah.
Just like within a poem. If you want to write a poem about the Nazi invasion of Poland, but it turns out to be a poem about a poodle that you loved as a child, go with the fucking poodle. You can always write about the Nazis later.
Yeah. Yeah. Like the actual production, actual being able to just work and have that text then but like when you were talking, Dan, like about kind of sort of working and sort of teasing new ideas or stuff out of working, and it put me in mind of like listening to some painters talk about how they work, and like how there's on the one hand there seems to be a kind of ideas that arrive to you almost like in a revelatory sort of way, like they're from without. It's almost like aha, like this, I can do something with this, or what if it was like that. And then on the other hand, there's kind of like a sort of creative impulse, which is more like, what would happen if I, dot dot dot. If I did this, I did something like that, all right, put it like this, like and it seems to me that like a lot of like your practice involves a lot of making decisions like that. But I mean, do you often feel kind of like that? A lot of ideas do kind of arrive to you, or do you have to tinker with stuff a lot? Do you find yourself tinkering more with writing and editing, or do things come more fully formed now?
They here and there, but mostly like when I'm writing the plays, and in this play I'm writing, I think talk about it. This current one I'm writing about Joe Hill is that I have the characters. I have a note and say, okay, in this scene, this character will say this, and then it just sort of unfolds, and I'm just sort of like taking dictation of what they're saying because I see the characters on stage and they're talking and whatnot, and that's part of the fun of it. And I've said this many times too. Most writers, most artists that I know, angst. This woman who's got the post-its in the timeline on her wall, and she's not going to have fun writing this thing. Maybe she's not smart enough to know that it's not going to turn out to be a particularly good book. Even if it's a competent book, you have to have fun. And part of the having fun is this generative dynamo. It's a thing that you don't know is a good thing. When I started Levels, I didn't know the end. Like I said, I ended up down the same alley as the prisoner. But I didn't know that. Although you could say, well, since you're referencing it, it might have been in the back of my mind, and that's certainly true. But it's certainly not like the end of The Prisoner, except for the fact that we're not quite sure of how it ends. But it's a totally different ending.
It's comparable, but I take your point. I think like what you were saying about the sense in that like. The novel almost happens for you in real time as you're writing it. In our previous interview, you were saying that as you were writing like the New York quintet, you were that you were sort of gasping as you were writing it. You were going, no, not like this, but that things happened kind of so as spontaneously as that kind of like it would almost take you by surprise.
Well, yeah, and things. I mean, Jessica she's got a great memory. She could give you chapter and verse about, if she went through my book, she said, oh, that really happened to us, that Dan, because as in the course of writing, if I'm writing a book and it takes like Levels took about 4 months to write, 3.5, 4 months, when I'm writing that, well, things happen to me. I didn't have the deer hitting thing when it happened to me, and I was depressed for a day or two after it happened, and I said, let me use that angst and depression for Tom, and so let me have Tom hit a deer. In one of my books, in fact, I think I forget which book it is, but I make a I think it's the spy book. I make a dedication to a cat that I accidentally ran over.
And Super 7.
The Super 7, and and so I just dedicated that book. But here it's more integral to the workings of the book. And
that's a very touching dedication, by the way. I've just got to mention that made me well up a bit. That dedication, that's like so sweet.
And I still can see that poor cat, because he's crossing this highway, and I couldn't stop for it, just like I couldn't stop for the other animal. It wasn't the aardvark here in Texas.
But you didn't just dedicate it to the cat. You dedicated it to all the animals that went before their time, like all the roadkill. I think.
Yeah, because I hate seeing that. Here in Texas, you see that a lot, which is why I don't let my cats out.
Levels doesn't have a dedication, though.
No, but it is a love story. And it's one of the... I generally use a lot of epigraphs, but every so often I don't, because I just want to throw... What?
You don't use epigraphs in this book very much.
Yeah, it's more just throwing it into the reader, into the situation, and let it play out. And I don't know if there's really anything more to say about the book. Is there any more questions you have about it?
Let me just see. Let me just look through my notes. No, I've only to say that that it's certainly a very kind of striking book, and it's worthy of a rereading. I think like that's certainly another big thing about your literature, Dan. That kind of it rewards upon rereading. Kind of and certain things will come to the surface with those returns to the text. So like I mean, I've read Norwegian the Family twice now, and kind of like
really?
it was like a whole different experience the second time around. So wow. I imagine this will probably be similar. Yeah. So only to say thanks for all the work you do, and for like letting us read this novel. It's really an important book, and I hope everybody listening gets a chance to read it one day. The plays. So of the plays I've read of yours this year, Dan, like I've read Tamerlane, I've read Beowulf, I've read Alexander, I've read the Arthur plays, and but I believe that's not all the plays you've written this year. Like I wouldn't be wrong, would I?
No, I wrote a play earlier this year about my family. I mean, off the top of my head, yeah. I mean, I think I've written 6 or 7 plays. Well, maybe 8 or 9 plays, 10 plays, and then plus the book. So I'm right now. This play I'm writing is my 70th play, the Joe Hill play.
Yeah.
But mostly of the last 10 plays, they've been of the historical nature, because the first 50 or 60 plays were all basically based upon Danny Wagner and my life.
Yeah. This focus on myth in your plays, or on antiquity, or like figures like Alexander, great figures of history. Like it's really kind of, it's really noticeable now. Do you know what I mean? Like we're all expecting an Odysseus play in the works next. You know what I mean?
Well, I do have ideas on some of the Greek gods. When I was a kid, I loved Jason and the Argonauts, the film from the 50s. And I like the fact that they had the Zeus and Hera, I think it was, looking into the wading pool up in Olympus and seeing the movie. And I actually saw that in the theaters when I was in 71 or 72 when I was a little kid, when we'd sweep out New York movie theaters that were open 24 hours and sweep up all the old condoms and whatnot in the theater and get to watch a movie for free.
Yeah, it's not fun working in a cinema. Like, do you mean those all like Ray Harryhausen films?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're fantastic. Like like when I was a kid, I was really into Greek mythology as well. Like and I'm embarrassingly well versed on all the monsters and all that crap. Like,
well, that's one of the reasons I wanted to do Beowulf, because I touch upon Grendel and Grendel's mother element in the Edge of the Shone, and I wanted to do Beowulf more intimately, because I had recently seen clips of the 2007 Zemeckis film about Beowulf, where Angelina Jolie plays the Grendel's mother, and that wasn't the first time that Grendel's mother was turned into a seductress. There was a live action movie back in the early '90s. I forget the name. I think it was a porno star who starred as Grendel's mother. But I said, so in that play, which let's see, I don't even know the fucking titles because I just had the Beowulf play. Let's see, the Beowulf play is The Mind Never, and the Tamerlane play is The Night Slow Poison, which is taken from a line from a Weldon Keys poem called For My Daughter, in which the bitter narrator reveals that he never really had a daughter. And that's about Tamerlane's hatred or his killing of a daughter that he didn't know he had. And so I play with that thing. And then in the Beowulf play, we get the killing of the seductress female of Grendel's mother. But I tried, in the Beowulf play, I tried to ground that like the Arthurian plays in a more realistic manner, in that
the Bresson thing.
Well, Grendel is not really a monster. He's a berserker. He's a human being who's sort of crazy and large. And then we get Beowulf, kills him in the traditional manner by ripping his arm off. He dies. Then we get the seductress mother, but the seductress turns out to be played, hopefully, by the same character playing the Chloe character that I had mentioned earlier. And so she would play Chloe and play the seductress mother in the young form. The older form would be played by the Megan actress. And then there's a child who plays a younger version of the Grendel's mother. And she poisons people, and Grendel ends up basically ending up offing her. And then we get...
That's a very curious scene, the whole scene that plays out in the grotto with Beowulf and Grendel's mother, where that's very curious.
She's using her femininity and wiles, and even being a child, that he won't kill her. And he eventually does. And then I added the comic element, because the dragon is based upon the dragon in Beowulf was the first, I believe, or the second appearance of a fire-breathing dragon. And I decided that since this takes place supposedly in the original Beowulf 50 years later, that's far too old, because Beowulf would then be a 70-year-old man, and the idea that he could somehow superhumanly take on any monster and win would be ridiculous. So I made it just 15. So you could say 50 and 15 were mixed up a lot of times. In biblical stuff, the 969 years of Methuselah, if we go divide that by 12, it's more realistic that he's a 90-year-old man. But in the same way, I said, well, let me have Beowulf, and the dragon that ruins his countryside is really him suffering from gonorrhea. And so the dragon is the penis, and then we get a funny scene with his physician, who's basically saying, you got to stop fucking all these slave girls that we capture, and basically he's like, well, I have stopped. I'm only fucking like 5 women a day. And he's like, and so we get what might have been, if Beowulf really existed, what might have been the source of the dragon. On the other hand, Tamerlane is based upon a real person, Tamerlane or Timur, and the Timurid dynasty. And the only real addition there that isn't based on reality is his daughter Ilnara, which is, if you read my great play with Sargon had his daughter Enheduanna, who is the first known published human being. Her poems and song lyrics are the first known account of a human being having their works published by a publisher. And so I said, well, what if I invert the Sargon dynamic? Because even though Tamerlane did have daughters and sons with his concubines, we don't know any of the daughters. We know Miran Shah, the son who's listed there, who's sort of a goofy, sort of playful mini Tamerlane. I said, let's have some tension there, and I get into a lot of political aspects, because this was written in 2020, so there are echoes of COVID-19, and COVID is actually mentioned too in levels there, because it's set in 2020, and so we get the idea of protests, and there's a lot of the stuff here in the U.S. with black people being beaten and black men being shot. She is an activist in that age, and basically she eventually pushes Tamerlane too far, and she ends up being killed off by one of his secret agents, I guess you would call them back then, even.
Yeah, like there's also in the Alexander play. There's also something curious where the Alexander character is three different characters. There's Alexander the good, Alexander the bad, and Alexander the god. And they're all three separate. They're almost like one
There are
character.
four Alexanders. There's the good, the bad Alexander, the great Alexander, and then the god Alexander.
My mistake. Yeah, there's just four. Oh god, and they interact with the characters, but they're almost unaware of each other. Although at some points they are aware of each other, and they start actually.
Yeah, but
internal conversation
on stage we see Alexander murder the caretaker of what is it, what do I call her? Anyway, he murders the caretaker of the cult of Apollo, and yet later on, it's another Alexander who claims to have killed her, and so there's that melding of which Alexander is really the worst of the Alexanders.
That's quite a brutal ending to that play, actually. Like it seems that you're having fun though. Like with the thing about these plays is that it does seem you're having fun, sort of taking these established myths, these things which, like I was alluding to, a lot of people from their childhood have like a personal connection to, and subverting or flipping or twisting or doing, applying your own take to them. Like with the for instance, the whole thing with the dragon. Like you know that we're coming in with a certain expectation or assumption, and you seem to take a certain glee in just almost giving us the opposite of that.
Well, I mean, yeah, and then we end up with the commentary by Danny and Chloe and them at the end. But you always have to try to do something different. There's no unless you're doing a series and you have a recurring character and it's a I guess maybe a detective or something. You should always try to change things slightly and whatnot. Too often people fall into the traps. Now I changed. When I did the Arthurian plays, the Camelot Quintet, I said, let me do King Arthur as John Cassavetes would have done King Arthur. Because if you remember, there's a scene, for example, where Sir Gawain and Sir Azrael are being talked to by a barkeeper about the jousting tournament, and he's talking about it like it's a modern sporting event, soccer in your country or something, and he's talking about, oh, how Sir Eric, he set an all-time record by never being unhorsed in the whole tournament and whatnot, and we hear this the way people would talk in a more modern sense. We get a revelation that Gawain may have accidentally killed a woman, which somehow damages his psyche. But this is played over the whole five plays. In Beowulf, for example, it's only one play, and I'm probably another character I'm going to probably take on is Gilgamesh. Although I did a book 15 or so years ago called the Enkiduad, which is based upon the Enkidu hairy man character that Gilgamesh battles, and the main character there was called Gilbert G. Ames. But I probably want to go back again and expand that because there's a lot of gaps in there that I can play with ideas. So that's an ideal thing, and Gilgamesh in a sense is a precursor to all of these. Thor from the comic books at least is a comic book. I think they made Thor in the Marvel universe. Comic book universe. He's an alien that came to Earth just like the ancient astronauts, and they were worshipped as gods even though they were aliens. And in a similar way, Gilgamesh is a half man, half god. He's a prototype for Jesus Christ here in Christianity. So he's a character that's ripe for plucking and playing around with.
It's these kind of great sort of historical myth as well, like King Arthur and Beowulf and all this stuff. Like it does seem that you enjoy taking people who are in a way kind of heroes or sacred cows or and sort of making them humane, making them real, making them. I suppose I would venture to say flawed a lot of the time. Kind of. I mean, not all of them. So for instance, I think like some people like King Arthur gets quite a sympathetic treatment, but I mean, I think Guinevere is really the hero of that whole series.
Well, my favorite character is Dagonet, because Dagonet was a minor knight that later becomes important as possibly the person who really does understand Guinevere. Because I make Lancelot and Tristan, the two classic heroes, I make them sort of fops. I reemerge Gawain as the main hero in Camelot, and you know. Modred becomes basically a pouty little shit rather, rather than necessarily an existential force. But there's just to get back to Beowulf too. What I do there is I infuse a science fiction trope, because how Grendel's mother is killed and what she seemingly is may be supernatural.
Oh, yeah.
Because it turns out she's a pod person, like in Invasion of the Body Snatcher.
Like revenge, like body snatchers.
Yeah, because he finds these watermelons, and he cuts one open and there's looks like little fetuses. So it seems that she, Grendel's mother, is some kind of a being that even if he were to kill her normally, without having seen these pods, she would just regenerate and come back the next night. And so we also know she's not really Grendel's mother, that Grendel was sort of like her golem, that Grendel was somehow taken in by her, and I don't know if you know the golem myth. It's a Jewish myth about
like the myth, the big clay figure.
Yeah, right.
There's film as well. Have you seen the film of the golem?
Oh yeah. Silent films. I love silent films. And so the the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. You could also say that who is the character that Caligari controls? I forget. Cesare. Yeah, Cesare. However you want to pronounce it. It could be that Grendel is the Cesar of Grendel's mother. They're not really physically, genetically, presumably connected, but she's this maybe creature that controls things and is constantly smiling. But Beowulf kills her, but he doesn't attack the physical. He kills her, and she sort of like dissipates the way the Wicked Witch of the West dissipates in The Wizard of Oz.
What I really liked about the stage directions you wrote was that you wrote Beowulf decapitates Grendel's mother, and you basically said something to the effect of, "I don't know how you're gonna pull this off. I don't give a fuck." You just figure it out. Dude, I want a decapitation.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and you have to approach things if I go back to the Tamerlane play, I wanted the one that I haven't done an interview. I've done interviews about these characters. I did the three greats, the two greats interviews. I did an interview on Tamerlane, and I haven't been able to find someone to interview about Sargon. But with the end here, we get Ilnara basically going out very meekly, and we expecting her ending. And then, with the Beowulf play, it ends up back with the meta commentary and the characters arguing about the best way to end the play. And the actress character, Chloe, says, most actors like a definitive end. And Danny, the last thing he says is, no, I mean, you may be right about what actors prefer, but what of the audience at endings? I just don't know about, boom, blackout. So you get that ending that has been used before in film and on stage, just the way it's all a dream ending ends level. But is it really a dream? Because it's not definitive. And in this way, it's used that here you have this great mythic character Beowulf, and it ends with characters commenting on the side, and it ending in a sort of minor whimper. But that's good, because if you think of the characters that are doing the meta commentary are many times more complex versions of the minor characters that you'll see in a Shakespeare play. The witches, boil, double, and boil, I think it's in Lear where the witches appear, or is it Hamlet? I'm not sure which one,
Yeah,
but
more the witches.
yeah. And so
Owen Trouble,
right,
Fireburn.
right, and so you have that aspect of it, but these are more evolved and deeper representations because these characters reoccur and are adding something deeper to they end up sort of like the Harryhausen film with the Greek gods looking down upon Jason and his band.
Yeah, or like a chorus
Yeah,
almost. Like I think sometimes Danny or Manny or like something sometimes acts like a chorus, like standing on the outside commenting, or like there's this filmmaker called Sieberberg who in the '70s did a film adaptation of the Wagner opera Parsifal,
oh
and
yeah,
the way he staged it was that there's this giant head relief statue of Wagner, like asleep,
yeah,
and it's almost as if the entire opera is taking place within, Wagner's head as he sleeps.
yeah.
So the whole way through, there's this acknowledgement on the side of the fact that, so it's not like this cop out. It's not like this thing that you produce, like, rabbit out of the hat, like, haha, it's all just a fucking, a dream. Yeah. No, from the very beginning, there's a sense of like, that this could be something happening on the level of either your consciousness or my consciousness or whatever.
Yeah, well, that's similar. That's similar to Levels. And if you remember, in the fourth play, which is the Grail quest of the Arthurian play, you get the three questing knights. You get Bors, Parsifal, and Galahad, and they're basically like the Three Stooges. They're played for comic relief. And we get the Fisher King, who has several names and different iterations. But in the Fisher King, he actually has the name Peredur, which is one of the alternate names of Parsifal or Percival. And Bors is the only one that survives, but he's sort of a lackadaisical idiot who I think in one scene, no, it's Galahad who eats bananas, and then like Narcissus, as they're coming back from the Holy Land, he's looking into the water, and I guess he bends over too much, and in his knightly equipment falls into the water, and no one notices that he's gone. And then Parsifal ends up basically chasing a Yeti-like creature in the Andes as they're crossing over from Italy to France or whatever, and he ends up dead. And so
it reads like a surrealist comedy or something, like something from Flann O'Brien or something. It's like a slapstick almost.
Yeah, Monty Python and the Holy Grail, or the Life of Brian. Yeah. Yeah, there's that famous scene. I think is it the Life of Brian of the Holy Grail, where the one knight gets his arm cut off, and then he gets his other arm cut off, and then his leg cut off, and he still keeps coming, and he's missing all of his limbs.
Yeah, but I mean, in a way, it's not too far off. Like the grimy realism, sort of Bresson, some sort of Monty Python by way of Bresson. I think the funny thing is, like, even in like the first play with Merlin, like, you have this sort of breaking through of the narrative, and you have at one point, Danny Wagner, is it, like, looks through like a window basically onto the play and starts to like basically talk like God looking down from heaven, or like God in Monty Python the Holy Grail, just like, oh, just get on with it, like.
Well, yeah, and Danny Wagner is basically the all of that quintet. He's
Fire Eyes.
Fire. He's casting the characters this way or that way, and that was a way to work the Danny Wagner character into it. But again, like with the Beowulf play, we're back to Danny Wagner. Even in some of the plays where Danny Wagner and his world are the stars, Danny sometimes can break out of the character. My favorite use of Danny Wagner is when he's a kid. And so I do, one of the plays that I'll probably write in the next few months will be another long family-based play. I don't know whether it's going to be one with my adoptive family or my natural family, because I once, back in 1991, went for a Thanksgiving dinner to one of my natural families, and it was just a perfect comedy.
One of the plays I'm most fond of, like, is If God Were Alive, and that's like a family drama, isn't it?
Yeah, Aunt Darla, from hell.
No, that's that. Like, well, that's interesting. Well, you're always present in the plays anyway, or like some sort of substitute for you is present in there. Like, so life always kind of bleeds in.
With one exception, which is the Tamerlane play. There's no Danny
Yeah,
Wagner character, but it's connected to the universe because seemingly an ancestor of Big Frank Concetto appears in there. There are two Marco Polo-like characters, Francis and I think it's Giovanni Concetto, which
yeah.
Giovanni Concetto is described exactly as Big Frank. He's about 6'6", 200 pounds, and Tamerlane offers to have him fuck all his concubines so that his Timurid empire can have these huge knights. He's like, my God, this guy is a monster. I need to have soldiers like him. So there's this sort of
I
minor.
seem to recall that there was an ancestor of Ronald Halfdan, the Norwegian, in one of the Khan plays. I'm not sure which one, but I'm fairly sure he appeared.
There was I don't know. It's not Ronald Halfdan. There is an answer. Which character did I use off the top of my head? I don't.
Someone who might have more than a passing resemblance to the Norwegian.
Possibly, yeah. I mean, and that's again a way to just keep, because they're the only crossover, for example, between my poetic universe and the rest of my fictive universe, I think is I mentioned a character who was my first doppelganger, Kevin, from my 3 Kevin poems. Kevin, but and then obviously the fact that the poems are quoted throughout the plays and some of my books and whatnot. So it's a way to give people a way to dive back in and whatnot. And I could imagine, some critic or someone who really loves all my work, maybe writing, a 2,000-word book with the timeline from the Big Bang onto
some
the
sort of
far future.
Marvel universe, multiverse map of all the different ways your fiction connects up.
Yeah, and I mean that's interesting, and it would be flattering, but yeah, ultimately it doesn't really matter because each of the works should and does, I think, stand on its own. You don't have to know anything about a Big Frank Concetto beforehand to appreciate the Tamerlane play.
No. Like, although it was curious for me to wonder reading something like Levels, like what it must be like for somebody who's never read anything of yours before to sort of go in with no real assumptions about what's going to happen.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons too. I have some of the sex scenes too. Is that someone just reading this with no other way there, a little bit of TNA, a little bit of titillation is not bad.
Something you have a lot as well now is audience. It was quite pronounced in the Arthur plays. Was audience sort of actors being planted in the audience?
Yeah.
And the falsified sense of audience participation.
And I did that in some earlier plays, a few of them, not to that extent, but
yeah. How do you see that playing? The way that kind of you start to speak in the audience's voice.
As it comes to me, I'm not gonna set in stone anything that I'm gonna do 17 months from now or something, because like I said,
well, I was just saying the difficulty of putting myself in the shoes of someone who's never read your work. I mean, you've got in a way you've got to kind of think from the point of view of somebody who's coming to your work with fresh eyes.
Well, Jessica's saying, "Well, you write too much. You write too much," and I'm like, well, the thing is, you want to throw out a wide enough net. The thing that if I were to not write, if I were to just sit and before we did this, I was talking to you about the idiocy where I work, and Jessica has idiots and stuff at her job that she doesn't like. If all I was going to do is get frustrated and not do that. That I might not write the thing that gets someone in 72 years to do that, Schneider-verse kind of timeline or whatnot. And Jessica, because Jessica is much more precise and she likes to write things, and she doesn't. like I say to her, is that if I don't do these things, no one else will, because I can do them. And I think I was talking with one of the other people who's interviewed me and said an artist has a certain responsibility, because if I didn't write a Norwegian in the Family, no one would. Imagine if Melville didn't write Moby Dick. Imagine if Kubrick didn't do 2001: A Space Odyssey. Only he could do that, and only I can do what I can do.
Or else someone else would fuck it up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like do you find time like for reading yourself? Like I know you watch films and like TV stuff. Like, do you actually find time to kind of like read other like people's literature now? Like and if so, like, is there anything you've been reading that you found particularly worthwhile?
Well, just this morning, I read a short story that a fellow who's on the E-list that I know sent me, that he had published in a magazine, and he told me that it's looking like he's going to get a small book published with a small press, not none of the big presses, but so that made me glad. It was a good short story. It's more prose than the poetic prose that Jessica or I do in different ways. The last I watched a movie. Jessica wanted me to watch this movie that's a precursor to Yasujiro Ozu's Tokyo story called Make Way for Tomorrow. And Jessica was saying it's a great film. It's not a great film. I mean, it's got a lot of schmaltz. It's got some good moments. Yesterday we rewatched It's a Wonderful Life when I got home, and then I went to sleep. And a couple of the actors from It's a Wonderful Life appear in this film, which was done by Leo McCarey a decade earlier. But it's like I was like, Jess, come on. It's got so much more. The two older characters that are separated at the end by their stupid family are not even particularly likable characters. Not that they'd have to be likable, but they're not even. They don't have the depth of the realism. And so Jessica and I often argue about that, because I'm a better critic than she is. That's just the fact. And she's more moved by a lot of the schmaltzy stuff. And I can see the flaws. Not that it was in any way a bad film, but it's not a film on the level of Ozu. Ozu was an absolute master. And Tokyo Story is one of his 3 or 4 greatest films, and it's one of the great films of all time.
Yeah, I know you're particularly fond of Ozu and his kind of approach to realism, and like I think I still see kind of in a way like bits of Ozu here and there, not just in like the fart jokes, but like the approach to a lot of stuff. I mean, like, what about so you've been watching. I know you talk about TV shows a lot, and you like do you have time to watch TV and not like reruns of stuff, or do you keep up with recent television at all?
Whenever someone recommends something to me, usually what happens is someone will email me and they'll go, Dan, I've read Cosmoetica for 7 or 12 or 5 years, and I just wanted to say I wanted your opinion on this. So they send me a link to some BitTorrent site, which I'm sometimes wary about because there could be viruses.
Yeah.
But or sometimes they'll send me a link to something. And for example, like The Sopranos, I watched about 10 or 12 episodes of The Sopranos about 12, 15 years ago when I worked at a job doing phone work, and on lunch HBO was playing repeats of that. And I just think that's one of the most overrated shows ever. It's not that it's a bad or terrible show, but it's an okay show. It's not the greatest show of all time. And the main actor there, he was an okay actor, but I mean, what they're doing is third-rate Scorsese. I mean, and Scorsese stuff isn't realistic. But as far as other than my soap opera, and occasionally, I mean, I'll flip on something here or there. I did a show's 15 or so interviews ago about Mary Tyler Moore's show that when I got home from work, when I was working a little bit earlier in the day, I'd see some repeats of that. As far as the new shows, I mean, I just don't, here in America at least, I don't see anything that I would be interested in particularly watching. I mean, if someone recommends something, but oftentimes I have the same reaction as to when Jessica recommends something, because I'll be like, come on, you're kidding me. You're sending me this. And sometimes I think a lot of these people will sort of just try to prank me, because, I mean, I'm not going to watch stuff like there's a show called The Bachelor here in the U.S. where they have these vapid 20-somethings who are good looking, who just basically, after 2 episodes, I think I'm falling in love with you, and it's so obviously
Yeah,
scripted. It's such
reality
garbage.
TV
Yeah, and
drama
it's
shit.
so. I mean, I wish there was. I recently started this interview series, which is why this film is great. And I've done 3 films so far: La Dolce Vita 2001 and
Yeah.
Taxi Driver. I'm probably going to do why this TV show is great too. But they're probably going to be older shows, and I don't like that.
What spurred you to start making these videos then? Like, where you're addressing these films head on, and like why, like.
Well, I want to get a wider audience, and there was a guy named Rick Beato who has he's a musician. He was a studio musician, and he's got a YouTube channel called Rick Beato, and he sells his merchandise, his books, and whatnot there. And he did a series called Why This Song Is Great, and it's an interesting, but in his series, he never actually explains why a song is great. Let's say he's talking about a Led Zeppelin or a Beatles song. He'll say, well, and he'll detail. Well, notice here when George Harrison goes from an A minor to an F flat or whatever it is. I don't know the musical terminology, and he'll talk about that and say, man, that's really great. But he doesn't say why it's great in the sense that by going from here to there makes the human ear react in a certain way. So I wanted to, with these guys, say, get to talking about this cinematography or this moment, what that does in the context of the movie. And I've been mostly successful in the first 3 shows. I'm going to do, I've got 2 or 3 more lined up as you can see, I'm wearing an eye patch. And the reason I'm wearing an eye patch is because I had cataract surgery last month and I got to get my other eye. So I got one eye that's nearsighted and one eye that's farsighted. So it's not a good combination. So I'm going, once I get that operated on early next month, probably, I'm going to do on Persona, the Bergman film, and I'm going to do on which remind me too. I was thinking about.
Are there any? Sorry, go on.
I was thinking about Ingmar Bergman when I was watching It's a Wonderful Life yesterday, and It's a Wonderful Life takes the 180-degree approach from Bergman, not in the way Antonioni is 180 degrees from Bergman, but what Bergman will zero in microscopically on characters and delve into making characters, a few characters, really deeply. In It's a Wonderful Life, one of the reasons that's a great film, I'll eventually do that on my list, is because you get within the first 5 or 10 minutes of that film, you get a dozen characters who are definitely sketching these little scenes that come quickly. And Capra was so great at getting to the essential moments of this character's life, George Bailey, that technically it's a really great technique into getting into characters. And I've done that sometimes in some of my works. Well, Jessica's banging here. What's she doing? Oh no, she's just going out the door. Okay. But anyway, go on.
I was thinking with I was thinking with the kind of the recent thing with like Netflix and the sort of the whole thing with content farms and all that sort of stuff. I mean, like those content producers you were talking about, the ones who do like videos like why this song is great or why that song is great, they've got like lots of flashy editing and lots of kind of like slick production style as well, I think, which sort of makes people kind of, stop and share and all this other stuff because it's very consumable, it's very digestible, it's very convenient. Whereas I think kind of like often like a big extended like multi-hour analysis is gonna kind of initially like put people off.
But but what you get with a lot of those things is how many iterations of explaining the ending of Taxi Driver do you need? How many times do you have to know? The making of 2001. It's the same stuff that's repeated endlessly. Looking into Travis Bickle or something. It's the same 25 or 30 Hollywood movies that are constantly analyzing. Or how many times you have to have a video about, is Deckard really a replicant from whatchamacallit,
who gives a fuck? Well, like, are there any films like that you would like be like making videos about, like why this film is great, that we would be surprised to see, like that we would kind of not expect to be like in that canon of
Well,
cat
I'm
deep break.
gonna do Curse of the Cat People, which is
Oh, fantastic! Excellent.
because that along with Godzilla's Revenge are the two best movies about a child's point of view. And Godzilla's
Yeah,
Revenge is often slagged upon by Godzilla fans because it reuses movies from film clips from earlier Godzilla movies, and it's got the Minya character, the baby Godzilla that most people hate. And
yeah,
but yet, especially for me, I grew up in that kind of industrial wasteland, and it's such a because the character has to deal with school bullies, he has to deal with criminals, and he has to deal with a possible pedophile. And I've argued with this with some Godzilla enthusiasts because when I was 5 or 6 years old and I first saw Godzilla's Revenge in one of those theaters that I mentioned where I saw Jason and the Argonauts, me and my friends who were 5 and 6 years old, we knew the perverts who molested kids in the neighborhood, and we looked at that old grandpa figure who's looking after, I think it's Ishiro was the name of the character, and we said, "Uh-oh, he wants to pull Ishiro's pants down." I mean,
uh,
a 5 or 6 year old, we knew that. But anyway, another one that I want to do is let's see, It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, which I think is one of
yes.
the great comedies. And it's no one would consider that really a great movie. I want to do Bresson. You mentioned I want to do Ohisar Balthazar, which I think is a really great film, and it's quite misunderstood. What I'm doing though is I'm doing initially I'm going to go through 40 or 50 films of a single director. So well, I did 2001, but I'm not going to do say Doctor Strangelove unless I get some real traction with the series and I go a second round and do second great film by someone. I'm gonna do for Orson Welles, instead of doing a predictable film, I'm gonna do the one Falstaff or Chimes at Midnight.
Oh, right, that one. Yeah, yeah.
I don't know if you ever seen that, but that's
Yeah, I've
actually
seen
great.
it. Like, I'm quite iffy about Orson Welles most of the time, though,
Yeah.
personally. But like,
But the thing is, he takes a character who's really not a particularly good character in Shakespeare. His
no,
4 or 5 appearances that he makes in Shakespeare play, he weaves them together and brings a narrative that wouldn't otherwise appear. With Kurosawa, for example, I'm not going to do one of the historical plays. I'm going to do High and Low, which I think is his best film. Um, uh, with I'm debating on whether to do Tokyo Story or maybe Early Spring as the Ozu film. I'm going to do Capra.
Throne of Blood, I would say for Kurosawa. That's just that in a way that's his most like striking film, like the use of like kabuki and Noe shit, like the theater.
Well, I think that's a good. I think that's more in the popcorn vein. I would, Ikiru, The Bad Sleep Well, Redbeard is also a great film.
But Throne of Blood is so like expressionistic. It's like really got all that juicy. It's that hangover from silent cinema almost. It has a pulse.
Well, I'm also gonna. I'll probably when I do some silent films with, I'll probably do Chaplin's City Lights.
Oh, great,
With
great.
I'll probably uh, I'll have to see because
Buster Keaton's The General. That's another fantastic silent film.
well, I think it's a good comedy, but with Buster Keaton, and I rewatched The General less than a year ago. There's never people talk about the schmaltziness of Chaplin, but that's the thing that sets him apart is that buried within some of the schmaltz there are real moments of genuine connection with characters. And you don't have that with Buster Keaton. I mean, it's a great
Yeah.
set piece, The General. But for example, I'd sooner watch The Electric House, one of his shorts. The Electric.
Yeah. Oh no, I absolutely agree. The shorts are his best work.
Harold Lloyd, I'll probably do one of his silent films. Again, I'll have to rewatch some of them. Uh, I'll do. Let me think. I'll probably eventually do a John Ford or a Howard Hawks, but I have to choose them. I'm not going to do The Searchers because The Searchers is, I think, ghastly overrated.
Is Three Bad Men by John Ford? I remember that being pretty good.
John, yeah, but I want some things that are definitively great. Um, Not just something that I think or are
Three.
personally
Oh, I
attached
remember
to.
Three Bad Men being pretty good, but like it's yeah. I mean, you do have to kind of look at these films for their, I don't know what, like, great on its own terms or great in like a historical sense.
Well, it has to be great in terms of a technical sense, great in terms of, so for example, one of the westerns I'm going to do, and that I when I sent around, a couple of people have said they didn't want to do it because they were Western experts and they didn't think, they thought it was schmaltzy, was Shane. And to me,
Uh,
Shane is one of those movies like It's a Wonderful Life that I didn't watch until later on in life when I was about 40 because they both had that reputation. When I watched them, I'm like, these people are fucking stupid. I mean, Shane actually has a believable villain who actually gives a great monologue about why he's doing what he's doing. And it also has that mythic element. And if you watch Shane, one of the great uses of cinematography in Shane is with the filming of the Grand Teton Mountains. I hate when people talk about great cinematography in something like E Tu Mama Tambien or some
Sense
other thing,
does
where
something.
where all we see is the beautiful mountains. Well,
Yeah,
filming beautiful mountains, that's not cinematography. That's just photography. What
yeah.
happens in Shane is they use what do you call, a long distance lens, and the mountains get larger. They loom in the background in certain shots with the little boy and one. It's like it's going up to Valhalla. And Shane comes down from the mountains. We don't know anything about him, and then he exits the film, going up to the mountains. So
Yeah.
he's this mythic kind of figure there, and the characters, the family is believable. Uh, uh, there's the slight hint that the mother has a slight attraction to Shane, but it's not made overt.
Perhaps though, Dan, it is that mythic element which people find repellent as well as kind of maybe the sense of like a sentiment. Like I've actually not watched Shane or read the book. There's a book, isn't there?
Yeah.
So I can't say with so I'm speaking purely from a position of ignorance. But like when I think of like those Western tropes, it is kind of literally the guy riding down from the mountains with
Well, not in the way Shane does it. And Shane,
right.
there's a lone guy. Usually, you have something like the film High Noon with Gary Cooper, where the bad guys are coming on the train to get revenge against the Gary Cooper character, and no one in town wants to stand with him. And so the bad guys loom over in that way. And I'm certainly going to do Once Upon a Time in the West by Sergio Leone. Um, uh, what other ones? What
Have you ever read Population 1280 by Jim Thompson, who
no,
wrote The Killers? Well,
no.
that's a kind of a Western novel with, from the point of view of an unlikely protagonist or a protagonist you wouldn't expect to find in a Western,
Mm.
like one of these anti-heroes or like an intelligent sort of despicable man.
Well, the anti-heroes are problematic because oftentimes
Yeah,
people
yeah. You said this before.
they misuse the term anti-hero. There's a TV there's a website called tvtropes.com, and they have a term that they call the likable bad guy. An anti-hero is not a likable bad guy. An anti-hero is a character that we don't know whether they're good or bad. They are sitting on the fence and could be one or the other. Being when you have a
What's
bad
the typical anti-hero that you can think of from fiction? Like who comes to mind immediately?
uh well, let me think. An anti-hero. Let me, there are really so few anti-heroes.
Could you think of some from your own work? I know like the idea of the hero has like been a big theme, like in
Yeah,
some
I did the anti-hero, which is the super spy, the Super Seven. I mean,
Super Seven.
yeah, that that
Is Elias Walker a an anti-hero?
in that book, that Elias Walker is the Elias Walkers in three of them are a hero, but the first Elias Walker in the Wesson book just stumbles into it, so I undercut the idea of the hero. We know Elias Walker, the super spy, is an anti-hero because I don't know. Did you read that book?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
I absolutely loved it.
Do
I
you
loved
remember
it.
the scene where he's gloating over having killed this Russian woman, and then it turns out that it wasn't the woman that he really killed, because his real target later comes in. So he killed an innocent woman, not unlike Gawain may have done in the play, where he may
Is
have
it an
killed.
innocent woman he killed? I'm sure he killed, like, he did kill the Russian agent because she had the skull and crossbones tattoo on her ankle.
No, no. There's the scene where he's somewhere in Kansas or Missouri in the middle of the country, and he's to meet this woman who's a target, and he ends up killing her. And then we find out that
Oh, oh yeah, I remember the one you're talking about. Like the assassin called like oh, I forget her name.
I forget her name too, but
Widowmaker or something like that. Or
yeah, something like that. And so here's a guy who is in many ways not that unlike the Norwegian. I mean, the Norwegian is certainly has a psychopathic tendency in that he's constantly giving himself reasons for why he murdered. He doesn't see himself as a serial killer. He's the angel, he's the avenging angel kind of guy. But
self-justifying all the time.
But yeah, we know, for example, that the Elias Walker in that book, there's the guy who is the Russian guy, Super Killer or something, that was a real character. If you look up the names,
Yeah.
And the super spy goes in, bam, he kills off this seemingly superhuman, real life, real world guy who was killed under cloudy circumstances. So I neatly insert.
There's also the really chilling scene where Elias Walker meets Ronald Halban on the beach with a little girl,
which is a reworking of the very same scene from A Norwegian in the Family, except I changed the girl's name because that is being told from the super spy's point of view, whereas in A Norwegian in the Family it's being told by Manny Cole. And the time frame is slightly off. We see a little bit more of what happens before in the scene with the super spy in the super spy book, and we get a little bit more information afterwards, which suggests again what any reader of the New York Quintet knows is that Manny Cole is not completely honest, if at all.
Yeah. Manny Cole really is quite an enigma in a way. You said though, like you have in mind in the future, like a project about World War II, and I'm just thinking just off the top of my head, like there are a lot of kind of you gave a kind of very brief, bare outline sketch of kind of what that might involve, but like off the top of my head, I can think of a lot of tropes or cliches or sort of tired, overused things that are being used in a lot of World War II fiction, film, novels. There's a whole like culture industry now almost of these award-winning, high production value Hollywood.
If you remember in the Vincetti Brothers, and you've read that, right? I set one of the World War II settings in Alaska in the Battle of Attu Island and Kiska Island, and one of the central pieces of that is when battling the Japanese, one of the soldiers sacrifices himself running across the snow, gets his head blown off, but his body keeps running like a chicken that's been beheaded for another 5 or 6 steps and then finally drops. So if I'm going to do the World War II stuff, it's not going to be filled with cliches.
No, exactly. Well, this is the thing. Like we were talking about, like with your plays, you enjoyed taking things which have like an established, let's say that there's a whole bunch of academic kind of reflexive things that you could do with this genre or whatever. And like I think, especially I think with kind of World War II stuff, it's quite tiresome. Like I don't enjoy these films or even like World War One, 1917, or kind of like Saving Private Ryan, or any of these other things. It's just actually quite exhausting after a while.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan. The only World War II movie that comes to mind is The Thin Red Line, the version by Malick. Which does well. Although the 64 version is more faithful to the book, and it does star Keir Delay, and it's not a bad film by any means, but I don't know. Would I say it's a low budget? Yeah, but it's not a premier Hollywood production. But and that both that and From Here to Eternity were both written by James Jones, who was a very underrated American writer. And those two books are quite good books.
Yeah. Are there like sacred cows, things that are considered like great, like that people might expect to see on like the list of like why X is great, that really shouldn't be considered up there? That like for instance, I hear people talking about Apocalypse Now all the time, and I'm really not sold on Apocalypse Now. I mean,
Well,
I understand that's kind of a bone that a lot of people just
when
don't
I,
agree
when
with.
I do when I do Coppola, my two choices would either have been Apocalypse Now or the one with Gene Hackman,
The
the
conversation.
Conversation, and I lean towards Apocalypse Now because it's richer and deeper in the same way that I lean towards 2001 over, say, the one with Clockwork Orange or The Shining, which you can make
Yeah.
arguments for greatness for both of them, and I think both of them probably are great. With Apocalypse Now, I do think that's a great film. It's rich, it's textured, and it also, you could talk about the extended version versus the original version in the same way. When I do Cassavetes, I'm going to do The Killing of a Chinese Bookie. Um,
Yeah.
but I understand why some people don't like it, but I don't think you can really make an argument against it being a great film because it's so rich. And the thing is, it goes beyond the source novel of whatchamacall, Conrad, Joseph Conrad, The Heart of Darkness. And I was just talking with someone a week or two ago that Kurtz, as a general, is a much more fleshed out character, even in the little bit that we see of him, played by Brando, is a much more interesting and I think believable character than the Kurtz, who's merely just, to use the term, the errand boy for a company that's raping the Congo in the book. So I think,
Well,
although
there's certainly a lot more kind of like portentous and like enigmatic stuff. I mean, I think the quality that I resist, that part of me resists about Apocalypse Now, I suppose, is the same sort of thing that one gets on like certain rock albums when like you can tell the musicians have had too much cocaine and they have too much money, and you have like something which is like overproduced. Yeah, maybe it's a clumsy like metaphor, but like I think that's the kind of like vibe I get from Apocalypse Now. Is that sometimes it's a bit too, a bit too Moorish.
but by the time, because this is take 3 or 4 years to get through the first 40 or 50 films. So by the time I decide to do Coppola, I may change my mind. It's one of those things that I mean, I did La Dolce Vita in 2001 first, because if I had to pick the two best films, it would be either one of those two. And then Taxi Driver, I had a couple of the critics that I've used have expressed interest in doing some other ones, so I'll use some of them to give a little continuity here and there. The guy who did La Dolce Vita and then did Taxi Driver is really good. He's very got an infectious, upbeat personality, and he also slides in some interesting ideas and comments there. So that's certainly there. As far as any other,
well, you want substantive content about the film, that like, and especially you want to hear stuff that you wouldn't normally hear. Like you wouldn't want to hear just like the usual trivia off of the IMDb.
Yeah, and I don't want to just, again, when I did Taxi Driver, I just didn't want to explaining the ending, or this, that, or the other thing about Travis. There's a lot more to talk about than that, and how many of these videos that you talk with the slick productions, we see the same content, and they can sometimes some of them only use less than 5 seconds, so they don't get dinged for copyright infringement or something, which is ridiculous because they're clearly explaining it, whether you agree or not. They're clearly reusing it for a critical purpose. But that's the whole idea of content creators. I hate
all the time for my videos. It's terrible.
Yeah, the content, the idea of a content creator. I mean, what the fuck? Create content? What the fuck are you doing? You're making yogurt?
Fucking
tofu?
Like, it's such fucking PR management talk. It's fucking shit. Content creator.
I once one of my early Dan Schneider video interviews within the first 25 or 30, and I got suspended for like 6 months. That's why I created E-Cosmoetica, my second channel.
Yeah.
Was I used a scene from what the hell movie was it? I was doing something on, I think, film noir, and all of them were in the public domain here in the U.S. And some asshole in Germany put in a claim about it, and I'm like, fuck that bullshit. I'm in America. I don't give a shit what the fuck Germany does. I mean, and YouTube, if it's in Germany and you see that I'm the creator in the U.S. and the thing is, I even took the clips from a YouTube thing that said it's not in copyright, that it's in public domain. So it's like the whole Google and YouTube thing. You know, they're so fucked up, and they don't do anything. They favor such
shit. Right now, Gutenberg and Archive.com are being like hit with like tons and tons and tons of lawsuits. These big, massive corporations are getting together and then launching class actions against these public domain archival indices. And the very idea of like a public domain is being threatened.
Yeah. Well, the whole issue of copyright I've spoken on many times. The whole thing is ridiculous. The whole Mickey Mouse thing, fucking the Walt Disney Company is the biggest. Just this morning, for example, I commented on Quora. I saw this piece about someone was this cute little black girl who's in her early 20s, Halle Bailey, not Halle Berry, is playing the mermaid, in The Little Mermaid or something, and they were talking about her color, and I said, this would be an issue if she was cast as Napoleon Bonaparte or Catherine the Great. But she's playing a fucking cartoon. The bigger issue, I said, is why would any adult care about a Disney cartoon for kids? Well, they struck that down because I guess it's inflammatory to question the adulthood of people who are, if I'm a 55-year-old man, what am I going to get turned on by some cartoon character, black girl who's a mermaid? I mean, it's ridiculous.
It's what people fucking want, though. Like, have you seen like the stuff? Like I haven't been able to fucking escape Hamilton. You know, that's the fucking you can decide. Like, I don't want anything to do with this art. I don't want to have to look at it. I don't want to have to But it's just so it militates against you on social media, on every website. Like in all these different forums, just hear it fucking everywhere. It's so fucking hard to get like away from this big deluge of just fucking homogenized like culture where everything is just like American Civil War, the musical on the Disney Channel, starring
the whole of the U.S. It's not only just in the arts. For example, I had my Twitter account suspended because about a year ago, Ann Coulter, that cunt, she was cheering the bombing in Pittsburgh of a Jewish temple, and I called her a cunt, and they got angry at me. I said, wait a minute, she is actually cheering the murder of people because of their religion and ethnicity, and my calling her a cunt somehow dwarfs that. Then there was a woman named Juanita Broderick who claimed that she was raped by Bill Clinton, who was cheering on Trump. And I said, what the fuck is wrong with you? I said, you claim that you were raped, and yet you're cheering on a guy who is actively, and even more credibly than Clinton's been accused of rape. Well, they fucked me over that way. And then the thing that they finally got rid of me for, there's this guy named Jason Johnson who's a black commenter on goddamn CNN, and he was singing the praises of Barack Obama. And I said, Barack Obama is a mass murderer who's responsible for the deaths of thousands of brown people by drone strikes, and you're cheering him simply because he's black. And one of the little ass licks of this Johnson guy is like, you're nothing but a racist. Go back to your head. I said, I'm a racist. What are you, stupid? And I said, get your finger out of your ass. A black man is killing brown people just for the hell of it.
It's fucking neoliberalism. I think that's the thing that's like, for me, like, from what I've seen of kind of the arts, like that's a big thing that's actually poisoning the arts. Like where I see kind of artists, especially, are expected to be. I was reading the other month, Dan, this essay by this girl, this young woman, a curator, and just her whole conception of like what an artist is and what the role of an artist is in the year 2020 was just like, again, as like this PR person. Like her idea was like, oh, an artist is someone who basically goes into the Apple store and does a BLM, like Black Lives Matter mural, and like helps to usher kind of contemporary ideas into the world of the corporate state. Just this idea that the artist is supposed to somehow, again, like be some sort of social mediator or some kind of manager, some sort of managerial class.
Well, there's this binary thought that all art is political or it's not political. Are you telling me My Levels doesn't have political elements in it? A Norwegian in the Family doesn't have political elements? But I'm not going to dumb things down. I'm not just going to make little bumper stickers for your car. I'm not going to, I think I might have said this the last time I'm not going to talk about, oh, nuclear war is bad. Oh, raping little choir boys if I'm a priest is bad. Oh, black cops killing black men simply because they have too much melanin in the skin is bad. I don't. Any person with any brains and any decency is going to know these things are wrong. I don't have to tell you this. That's not the role of the artist. An artist is going to reveal things about the cosmos, about reality, that are more difficult. Again, Moby Dick is not about a crazy guy who gets a bunch of morons to travel 10,000 miles across the world on an ocean to kill a white whale. That's the thing that gets you into something deeper. Just in the same way, a middle-aged man's crisis over something that has perturbed him is not what the book really is about. I mean, there are political elements in the way, for example, Tom Alden treats the women, as I mentioned, whether they are figments of his imagination, whether they are real women, whether they're his wife only appears at the end, or whether they're these holographic sex toys.
But that's just it. Like when you get into it, like with something like Levels, and it's sort of, I would say, kind of its political import. Like COVID, for instance, is something that's in the background of the novel.
Yeah.
And kind of that whole idea by, I suppose, I suppose you could say this is almost like a social isolation book in a way.
Makes sense.
But with something like Levels, like I feel like it could almost be seen as kind of like a metaphor for 2020 COVID. Trump America, in the same way that The Castle in Franz Kafka is obliquely a metaphor for kind of like the tail end of the Austro-Hungarian Empire.
Well, I mean, the character of the All, even though it appears towards the end, in a sense, this is a character that is claimed to be all-knowing, all-powerful. It's what someone like a Donald Trump would want to be. Tom Alden has some of those characters. Like I said, he's not a perfect character. I mean, he has some flaws. The very fact that if he is the person who is the author of this dream or this nightmare or this Kafkan reality says something about him, and it says something about the nature of human beings at all, that we are our worst enemies. That gets back to, for example, there's I mentioned Charlton Heston in The Planet of the Apes. Charlton Heston's character goes from being a total misanthrope to being a defender of humanity in that, and that's a movie that I'm going to do too. The original Planet of the Apes, even though it has a lot of logical problems that he should have known he was on Earth a lot sooner.
Have you seen these fucking sequels they've done for Planet of the Apes?
I've seen 15-20 minute excerpts that a few people have sent me. I mean, I think they're better than the typical Hollywood stuff, but I don't think there's anything new going on.
Yeah, they're absolutely wretched.
Yeah. I mean, with again, I don't have to. I'm never going to talk down to you. I'm going to assume that you or any other viewer of my art or any art is intelligent, and we can have a disagreement. You can talk about this painter or that filmmaker, and we can disagree about Apocalypse Now, or we could disagree about someone was arguing on that Quora, who's a better actor, Harrison Ford or Robert De Niro? And I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? I mean, De Niro, yes, he's done a lot of shitty stuff just to make money over the last 30 years. But if you took his top 10 roles, Harrison Ford can't even touch them. Could you imagine Harrison Ford as Travis Bickle? Could you imagine Harrison Ford as Rupert Pupkin? I mean, give me a break. Could you imagine Harrison Ford in a movie like 1900, the Italian film by what's his name? The name slips my mind. The guy who did the name slips my mind, but it's ridiculous. And I'm not saying Harrison Ford is a bad actor. He's just not a great actor. He's not a great actor. He's better than Tom Cruise. He's better than Leonardo DiCaprio. He's better than Keanu Reeves, but he's not a great actor. He's given some good, solid performances. The film he did with Polanski, where his wife is kidnapped or whatnot, is bad. Someone like Liam Neeson is another one of these actors, like Ford, who's just stiff. Liam Neeson is always Liam Neeson. Harrison Ford is always Harrison Ford. Say what you will about De Niro, but he had that chameleon-like quality. Travis Bickle is not Rupert Pupkin. They're totally different.
Yeah. It's typical. I mean, like, the most beloved actor of our time, like right now, is probably Keanu Reeves. I mean, like, that probably.
Or Tom Hanks, who's another very overrated actor.
Yeah, Tom Hanks.
I think Tom Hanks is.
His likability, though, Dan. I think like that's just it. Like how he's like this, this PewDiePie, bland everyman. Like,
I think he was a good comic actor when he was on TV with the Bosom Buddies. He did good, solid comedy. But to me, when I see him dramatically, it's ridiculous. Now his dramas are mostly bad. Forrest Gump, I mean, that's better than Saving Private Ryan. But and then you had the Philadelphia thing, which was so preachy.
Do you know a film I watched the other night? Like, I'm actually curious to get your thoughts. I watched them for the first time, Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Oh, which is one of Spielberg's better films. It's not a great film by any means. But it was a film where he was actually trying to be intelligent and not condescending. The problem with Spielberg is he's always wants to wrap things up in a bow. I think you or someone might have said something like that. He always wants to please the audience. You don't have to please the audience. You don't have to make an audience feel comfortable. Give them quality. If I'm watching a Bergman film, and when I do Persona, I don't like the film Persona but it's the ultimate dick-waving film because Ingmar Bergman was right then in 1965, 66. He was saying, I'm the greatest filmmaker in the world. I don't need special effects. I don't know he did it. I can take little things here and I can play with cinema like no one else could. And whether it's that the little kid, looking at the pictures of the women sticking his hands up, the spider crawling around. He could do it. He's saying, I'm Ingmar Bergman, you're not. And it is the ultimate dick-waving film, and he's showing off, but he can do it because it's a great film. I don't necessarily like the film, but I'd be a fool to say it's not a great film.
Yeah, I think that's something that's interesting. Like, I mean, I very often feel myself also at the same time kind of attracted to artists who are nothing like me. Do you ever find this? Like I feel myself kind of drawn to certain creators and their approach precisely because it's so diametrically opposed to my own.
Well, Ozu. I mean, Ozu's a perfect example.
Yeah? How so?
Well, I don't think Ozu, as far as I know, ever did anything. I mean, I couldn't conceptualize Ozu doing a film on the Yakuza. The equivalent of a Norwegian film. I don't think Ozu would have ever done something like a lot of my plays where he's reworking stuff. And I mean, I have a darker take on life, if you want to use a term like that, which I don't particularly like. But if you wanted to use that term, Ozu is in many ways more upbeat. And when he's not totally upbeat in something like Tokyo Story, there's a positivism that he has.
Yeah. positivism. That's a good way of putting it. Like I feel like there's quite a lot of positivism in Levels, though. I think that's what I was alluding to earlier. That like this is a book that when I think of like the New York Quintet, I do think of quite macho books. But this one does feel more like
well, women.
I wouldn't say there's anything like falsely like sentimental kind of about it, like in the way that it doesn't make, because we were saying like with creators who try to assume what the audience is feeling, it always just comes across like they're just instructing you how to feel. Like this is a sad part, feel sad now. This is a happy part, feel elated now. This is a contemplative part, feel like a. But you know, you don't want to patronize your audience. You want to
well, I've always said to people when they read anything of mine, Jessica's, she probably gonna, we'll have to wrap up pretty soon because probably gonna,
okay, that's fine.
But in maybe another, what is it, another 10 15 minutes we can go. But I've often said what I intend is meaningless. If you what you get, if you know, oftentimes people will bring up things that I didn't intend or whatnot, and oftentimes I'll say, "Oh, that I can see where you get that," or sometimes they'll say, "This reminded me of A, but A was influenced by B, which was influenced by C, which was influenced by D, which is what I was going for D." But there's that dominoes that fall down to this A, to something I never heard of, and I say, "Oh, that's interesting." But that's the way art should be. Art should be something that there are these connections, and once I'm done with something, I'm just the author. You know, if you read Levels, or you read A Norwegian in the Family, or you read a play, or you read one of my poems, and you get something really good from it that affects you positively, that's good. I can't ask for more. Yes, again, if I'm writing about the Nazi invasion of Poland and you think it's about a poodle, then something has gone askew. But if it's reasonably within in the realm of possibility, you know, if you're reading Levels and you know it reminds you maybe of some confusion that you had, let's say when you were coming out of the closet or something. I'm just pulling something out of my head. Then I didn't intend that, but that's good.
To hit the nail on the head, like isn't like what came to mind instantly reading Levels was that isn't life a bit like this? Isn't life a bit like Levels? You know, isn't I mean again maybe that sounds a bit too open ended, but like life sometimes does feel like this thing where kind of you know everything is slightly against you, and it's like this challenge where you have to like you have to accumulate something, you have to get your way to this goal, this partial object, and time slips by.
Well, not always, but most of the
Not
time,
always.
not always, but most of the time, the best fiction or the best art will take a character, if it's a narrative thing, will take a character and put him in a different situation. But the character is based in reality. Even if it's in an unreal situation, you want to have the character working within the confines of the diegetic universe that you've plopped them into. You don't want to have, if I have Big Frank Conchetto, and I do, and in this book that I'm going to do that's going to end the Maravelli saga, I have a flashback to him, and we find out that Big Frank was really you know, supporting charities, and he really didn't care. And I totally undercut that character and try to shoehorn him into something for some reason. Let's say I had a revelation and I became a born-again Christian. That would totally, and I wouldn't, even if I did become a born-again Christian, which I won't, but even if I did, I would never violate my own tenets of my universe. Big Frank is a nasty piece of work, and he's always going to be a nasty piece of work because that's what he has to be to make the art that I put him in work. You know, you can't take, for example, Uncle Billy from It's a Wonderful Life and plop him into a Godzilla movie. It's not going to work.
I'll hit you with some like short and sweet questions, like blast through some like before we wrap up. Down, like
Okay.
Would you ever consider in the future making like a horror novel, like a horror book? You know,
I thought about doing a genre kind of thing. It would have to be something that went beyond the horror genre, in the same way that the Super 7 went beyond a spy book, and the way that Edge of the Shown and the Levels go beyond sci-fi, because I don't want to do something that's been done before. So if for example, I had an idea with some kind of creature like the All, but the All was some negative creature, maybe I do that. But it would have to be something that would come to me. I'm not going to just. I can't see myself, at least now, I don't have any idea that I would do a horror novel. The closest thing to a genre book, again, would be maybe doing the World War II book, but it wouldn't be like other World War II stuff.
Like, what do you think, kind of a more sort of general question, but what do you think COVID's overall impact on kind of the arts is going to be, like, from 2021 on?
There'll be a lot of preachiness early on, and probably the best stuff, excluding myself, it'll take decades to sort out. Just like, when you look at, for example, some of the best war films of World War II, they weren't the ones that came out during World War II or afterwards. They came out 20 or so years later, in the late 60s, early 70s. So, and what particularly will happen with it, I can't say. But it's going to take some time to sort out, because now most of the art that's created is going to be anti-Trump bullshit, and Trump is going to be a footnote in history.
Well, my next question was going to be rather, can we expect a Trump novel from Dan Schneider?
No, he's not worth it. I mean, that I can't see anything interesting in him. That he's a bumper sticker. He's not really worthy of any artistic consideration, in my estimation.
He's not a worthwhile fictional character.
Richard Nixon is a different story, and I touched upon Nixon in there. Nixon actually had some depth. He was a twisted character, but Trump is basically just an overgrown baby shitting in his diapers. So,
yeah, I mean, what are your kind of thoughts on kind of the films that have come out this year, kind of the sort of big award nominated films like Parasite and all these things?
Haven't seen any of them.
The Shape of Water, have you seen that?
That's based on a book, isn't it? I think I might have read the book.
No, not in this case.
No, I'm talking. That was something about. Was something with an elephant, or was it the color of chocolate or something?
No, I think you're thinking of the Okia thing or something. Like, I think that's something on Netflix. Like, I haven't seen that myself, so maybe I'm just.
No, and again, I'm not unless someone says, "Oh, you got to see this damn." But then again, Jessica just recommended this older film, which doesn't hold a candle to Ozu's Tokyo Story. So I tend to be wary from it. Maybe when I retire in a decade or so, I'll have more time.
Yeah. My kind of final question, then, I guess, like, it's have you read Jess's recent novella about Joan of Arc?
I read everything of hers before any of you.
Right, great. Like, so, like, what I'd like to know your thoughts on it.
Well, I think it's a great novella. I think she, it took her longer to write that than it took for me to write this Levels. And I don't mean that as a criticism, but that's just the way she operates. I know. I wish that we could be retired, because then she could be more free to do more writing. And I told her, I gave her a couple of ideas or a couple of suggestions about what not to do. She based it mostly upon what's his name's silent Joan of Arc film. What's his name? The guy who did Vampire, Carl Theodor Dreyer's Joan of Arc film. That's a good example, though, of something I would never write, because I don't have any religious sense. Not that Jessica is religious, but if I couldn't see myself doing Joan of Arc as a figure, because she's so attached to that. Unless I would take her as being someone who is clinically psychotic.
It's a very peculiar kind of religious sort of sensibility, though.
Yeah, and the moments that she chooses are very good, and the fact that she calls her Jean rather than Joan, it has a Bresson kind of quality to it.
Yeah. Like, that's do you I know she hasn't read Levels herself. Like, are you anxious for her to read it?
she's gonna do what she's gonna do. She, yeah, I don't have time. You shit out a novel every 3 weeks, and you shit out plays every 3 days. And so she'll read it when she reads it, and I've told her that her character is the great is the key to the book and whatnot. Someday she'll
Yeah.
read it, and then she'll complain about this or that because she hates Jessica Wagner, that character. I'm not like that cunt. I don't talk like this. So it's that.
Well,
That's
you portray her so flatteringly, so you
yeah.
know.
Yeah, well, yeah, I know. But she'll read it eventually. She hasn't read. I don't think she's read any of my work since A Norwegian in the Family. Let me think. Well, she's read a few of the plays, but
Ludovico technique, like
yeah,
get the pincers out.
yeah, yeah. But she'll do what she's going to do what she's going to do, and that's fine as long as she's producing and whatnot. It's difficult to keep her from imploding because she's very much more affected by things than I am. She's into that Enneagram stuff, and I'm not. She's into all of this stuff, and then when she finds out or something that I saw something about, like I mentioned, this woman that is plotting out the book and whatnot. She hates all these women. Well, how could you be with them? I said, well, I didn't know you were out there. And when I was 25, you were 13 or 14. So it's like, I had to be in my 30s before I could even if I met you, that I wouldn't be arrested for pedophilia. So,
Love. Well, it's always the same, isn't it? It's
yeah,
domestic bliss.
yeah.
But anyway, yeah, like I think that's wraps up pretty much everything we've been talking about, Dan.
Yeah,
So,
okay.
I'll let you get off to your Christmas dinner,
Okay.
and
Well,
thank you very much for talking to us.
Well, yeah, and I enjoy your Christmas as well.